different. I'm stealing this idea from Reef Bum. I saw what he did, and he had his tank in the background. I was like, you know, I kind of like that he's sitting there and he's relaxed. I was like, I just want to relax. But, you know, obviously not that relaxed. But I thought, all right, this way you can see 2 tanks at once, and we can get into our topic. I can not stand the entire time, which would be a nice change of pace for me. And I do hope that... You know what? This is what it is. If you hate it, that's fine. There's always another time. You know, next time we'll do it differently. Hi, Tom. Hi, Rick, Lynn, Paul. Paul, you're not first. Santana Reef is here. Nitrox, Amar, and Bronx. Reefer, Brock is here. So he must be from the Bronx. So nope, not quite, Lynn. You tried. Hey, Terry. So, I wanted to talk about water changes this week because I have been doing water changes. Now, I know for the longest of times, you know, I would just do them sporadically, but the little tank right there needs water changes every single week because that is the only filtration that tank gets. So if you have a small tank and you're dealing with water quality issues, usually the water change is the simplest solution. And I was just talking with someone on Instagram yesterday, and he was saying how his nitrates are too high. And I said, what size is your tank? And it was really small. I mean, I think he said it was, I don't know, 38 gallons, maybe smaller. And when the system is that small, you can literally do a decent water change, like a 50% water change, and solve the problem of like nitrates being too high. And so you shouldn't fear them. I mean, they aren't fun. They do involve effort, but in the end, when it comes down to doing a water change, what we want to do is we want to match 3 things specifically. The temperature has to be the same, the salinity has to be the same, and then ideally the alkalinity/pH should be the same. So either you're measuring pH on the tank and on your salt water, or you're measuring alkalinity of your tank and your salt water. And if those 3 match, then you can do as much of a water change as you like. Yesterday, I did a big water change on the Reef behind me, the 400 gallon. And I really wanted to change 200 gallons. I'd made about 250 gallons of water, and my gut said, change 200, just knock it out, because you're doing this. You've already got all the equipment out. But at the same time, I decided I'm going to err on the side of caution. I don't want to freak out my corals, because if I do too large of one, my concern is that the nitrate will drop too quickly because my nitrates have risen so high over the last 60 days. I don't know why they went up. I can't identify it to anything specifically. I don't think it's the feeding I do. I don't think it's any of my equipment. I don't actually know where they came from, but every single week after week, they went higher and higher and higher. And last I checked, they were 80. I was like, I'm back to 80. I was at 20 for like 6 months straight with no surprises. And all of a sudden, it was 35, it was 50, it was 68, you know, and then suddenly it was 80 and higher. So I did a big water change last night. I'm going to do a smaller one today, which will probably be around 80 gallons. And that will have changed 200 gallons on the tank and gotten those nitrates down lower than what they were. And I will test and see where they are. Another thing you can do after you do a water change is you can test the water again and see how things are now that you've changed a percentage of your aquarium. So if you had, let's say your alkalinity was 8.6 and you do a water change, check your tank again 20 minutes later after that water change and see if it's still 8.6. If it is, all is well. If it's lower, you can buffer the tank up with just a little bit of an additive and bring that number up to the normal level rather than just leaving it at whatever it ended up being. So I'm asking you to actually test something again. And I did it. You know, I did my big water change and then I tested the tank and I was like, nope, I want it higher. And I went ahead and I buffered it up and all was well. Now, when it comes to mixing your salt water, there's a few rules that everyone should know, and sometimes people don't read the instructions. But the very first rule of thumb is have a very clean container to mix the salt in, and then you fill it up with water all the way up for as much as you're going to use, and then you add the salt. I don't know that you've made this mistake, but some people will add the salt first and then add the water on top, and this creates a super salinity situation to where it's, you know, as the water is coming in, it's just way too salty and it's causing everything to precipitate out. So you're actually wasting all those elements that are included in the salt mix, and we don't want to do that. We want to mix it up. We want it to all be well. We'd like the water to be nice and clear, and then you can go ahead and you can do your water change and pull dirty water out of the tank and put new water in. Now there's a couple of ways of changing water in a reef tank, and one of them would be my preference, which is to take water out of the sump and refill the sump rather than taking water out of the display tank. But if you prefer to take water out of the display tank, you can. And some people like to take pictures of their tank when they're doing that, and they'll say, look, my tank is at low tide and it's half down, and you can see the corals are all exposed, they're getting some air on them. If you happen to be a person that's still running metal halides, you probably already know this, but we don't want to leave the metal halides on too long while the water level is down, because you're going to actually cook those corals under the heat and of the lighting. So if you're to LEDs, it's not going to be as critical, but we still don't want to leave them exposed too long. Now, in the early 2000s, I had a 29-gallon aquarium, and I didn't like lifting the bucket up to pour it in. It was just too much effort, and I always think, work smarter rather than harder. And, to climb up a step ladder carrying a bucket of water and then pouring it into the tank is too much work. So I would highly recommend, if you haven't already done this yet, get yourself some kind of a small pump that you like. You can rig it with however system you like. I like using a power strip and then some long tubing, and you can put the bucket next to the aquarium. You can put the pump in there and hold the tubing in your tank, and then hit the button on the power switch and go ahead and pump water in. And then when the tank is filled to the right level, you can just hit the switch again. It stops the flow, coil the tubing back into the bucket, and put away all your stuff. That's one way, and that's how I did my 29-gallon for a very long time. I ran that tank for 7 years. So doing a water change that way, I mean, I lifted the bucket, I don't know, a dozen times and said, I'm never doing this again. I mean, a 5-gallon bucket is close to 50 pounds. So you're lifting that up over to, to the height of your head, or if you're standing on a step ladder or on a chair, some people do that. They step on something small that's rickety and they could get hurt. So I would highly recommend just pumping it in there and making your life easier, rather than struggling and possibly spilling it or falling down and making a giant mess that then you have to clean even more stuff up. Let's see. The salt mixes that are available, there are lots of different kinds, and you can choose a brand that you like. A lot of times people say, well, I don't like this brand, but I like this brand, and that is kind of an opinion. I mean, it really does come down to, what do you feel comfortable with? What do you like the look of? And, how did the tests come back? So if you were, let's say you bought a brand of salt and the alkalinity is crazy low, and you just didn't like that. You wanted a salt mix that had a higher alkalinity in it, then you might shop for a different brand. The other choice would be to buffer up the salt water you just mixed up to get it to the right alkalinity, because everything else in that salt mix is perfect and you're happy with it. And then you can do your water changes. So, you have that option as well. I've been using Aquavitro for years, and I noticed that when it's not all the time, but certain batches that I mix up, like certain barrels of salt that I use, the water's more cloudy. And so I actually called him up this week and I said, listen, I've been doing this hobby for 25 years. Have I forgotten how to mix salt water? Is there something specific that you would recommend? And he said, you don't have to heat the water. And I thought, oh, because I tried room temperature water and it was kind of cloudy. And then I tried heating up the water and it was kind of cloudy. And I thought, oh, I really want to pump out clear water and put in clear water. I don't want to put in milky water or things with particulates. And I just want it to look clear. And he just said, sometimes that will happen. If you can mix the salt more slowly, that would help. And I thought, well, I don't know how much slower I can go. It takes me about 20 minutes to add all the salt to my container. So I'm not just like putting a giant bag over the container and just slicing it open and letting it just goosh in one giant, 80-pound blob. I am putting in 12 pounds of salt at a time, going back and forth to the garage to get more salt in my little tiny bucket, walk it up the ladder, pour it in, walk back out to the garage, scoop out some more salt in my little tiny bucket, repeat, repeat, repeat. And I just felt like, I don't know how much slower I could have gone. So anyway, what I've done as a workaround for when the water looks a little cloudy and I don't like it, and this has worked the last few water changes, is after it's fully mixed and I've measured everything and the water's good, I just turn off the circulation pump entirely and let it settle out for a few hours. And then I can pump clear water into my aquarium, and I like doing that. It looks a lot better. The 27-gallon cube tank isn't quite as clear as I'd like it to be, and that's because I just added a pistol shrimp. And it keeps kicking up the sand. Now, it's a little tiny one, and the fish that it's friends with now is double, if not triple its size. So I really didn't think it was going to kick up much sand, but I am incorrect about that. So I'm going to get a hold of Siche because they have this really cool filter box that hangs in the back of the tank on a magnet. It's called the Shark. And I want to hook that up to catch the tiniest of sediments until I've eliminated that sediment from the tank. And I think then the water will look more clear. When it comes to measuring the salinity of your water, you definitely want to have the right tool for the job. And I really like a refractometer. There are other types of devices on the market. And there's a digital refractometer from Milwaukee that I used for many, many years that you just put a few drops on top of the lens and you hit the button, it tells you the salinity. It's great. And if you have any doubts or if you want to double check your work, you can wipe it off, put a few more drops. You know, it's more than drops. You're filling a little basin, I could say. I don't know how much that holds, a milliliter of water, but you just fill it up and you measure again, and then you can measure the third time. And by measuring it 3 times and then dividing by 3, that would give you the best average. Now, if it just says 35 ppt every single time, it's perfect. If it says 31 ppt, 35 ppt, 32 ppt, what's going on? You need to figure out what's happening with your device, and maybe it's time to calibrate it. A refractometer is a device that you hold up to your eye and you look at a very bright light. I prefer looking straight into one of my bright LEDs in the kitchen that I have on the ceiling, and that way you can completely see the difference between the blue section and the white section that's inside the gauge, and that way you can see where your salinity is. And we do, I mean, I'm going to say we. I am going to encourage you to shoot for 1.026 specific gravity or 35 ppt for your salinity. And I know some people run it lower, some people let it creep up higher, but in generally speaking, reef tanks do quite well with 35 ppt, and that is basically the benchmark that we usually shoot for. So if you're running your salinity a little bit lower, go ahead and bring it up, because it'll help to bring up not only your major elements, but your trace elements may measure better as well when you're doing testing such as ICP. So I would suggest raising that up a little bit higher. Some people have intentionally kept lower salinity in their tank because that helps with fish disease to resist it, but that's really just something the fish stores do because they want the fish to live long enough for you to buy them. So if you were to keep your salinity down low because you're trying to mimic them, you don't need to mimic them. I mean, think about it. In the ocean, most of these fish are in a specific salinity, and if they aren't happy with it, they actually swim down or up to where it's more or less salty, trying to find that sweet spot, just like they do with temperature. And they look for a cooler area or warmer water till they find that sweet spot that makes them comfortable. So you can go ahead and keep your tank at 1.026 and not sweat it. Don't worry at all. If you are doing automatic water testing, automatic water changes to where your system just does it every single night while you're asleep, or it's doing it every day while you're at work, or however you're doing it, it's super important that you measure salinity every single week to make sure that it hasn't wandered, because you have water going out and water going in automatically. You've got a protein skimmer that's collecting skimmate. You've got a top-off system that turns on and off. You might be using kalkwasser to maintain alkaline and calcium. And we want to make sure salinity doesn't waver. Now, fortunately, with a bigger tank, I don't have to worry about that as much. But for you guys with smaller tanks, it's actually way more critical that you stay on top of making sure your salinity does not wander, because just a little bit of evaporation will make the tank much saltier than when you've put in top-off water. What else can I tell you? I mentioned temperature. So if you are trying to match the barrel or the bucket of salt water to your tank, you're going to need a small heater. Now, I would definitely not use an oversized heater accidentally. For example, you own a 200-watt heater, so you just throw it in a 5-gallon bucket. That's a lot of wattage, and you could actually raise the water temperature much too high, as well as the mixing pump. So if you have a mag pump, those already give off heat, and if you were to put that inside the bucket, just it's sitting overnight, you might have water that's 82, 84 degrees, and your tank is 78, and so your water is actually too warm to use. You need to let it cool off for a while until the temperature comes down to what your tank is. Now, back to the automated water changes. If you're doing those all the time and they're in small amounts, you might say, well, my tank is a 90-gallon. I'm changing 2 gallons a night. Temperature isn't a factor at all. You're probably right. I mean, that does make sense. But what I would like you to do, since we're not worrying about temperature, is you definitely want to double check the alkalinity of that salt water throughout the next few days or week weeks. I don't know, how long does your batch of salt water last you, but you want to make sure that it's not too low or that you're dosing enough alkalinity on a daily basis to make up for the lowered alkalinity going into your tank with every water change. So these things do happen. There's a lot of balance when it comes to reef keeping. We don't want to forget one thing while we're doing something else. And I understand the whole idea of automating it to where you don't have to think about it. That's got to be better than not doing it at all, right? So I would encourage you to go ahead and make sure you're double checking your salt water throughout the duration of it being depleted and just see how it's doing. How's it holding up? Is it measuring okay? Does it need to be buffered up and mixed one more time during that period between making a new batch of salt water and your 14 days in a row of doing a water change? Let's see. I'm going to scroll up and catch some of these questions, see if there's anything I've omitted that I should have mentioned by now. Sometimes that happens afterwards, like, oh, I should have said that 20 minutes ago. I didn't mention the water source. Now, a lot of times someone that's newer in the hobby will just use tap water, and they use prime to lock up the chloramines and the chlorine and the ammonia, nitrite, nitrate. But really, we want to use RODI water, and you want your water to be as pure as possible. But if you put that pure water in a dirty vessel to mix the salt water in, you're actually going to make the water dirty. And what I mean is the TDS level will be higher. So let's say you put all that water from your tap through a nice RODI system, and it comes out 0 at the end of the tubing. That's perfect. And you put it into this barrel that's filthy, and it's 80 TDS already before you add any salt. So you want to make sure you scrub your container at least once or twice a year to make sure it's nice and pristine inside. You can actually scrub it with bleach water, and that's not going to hurt your tank. So you would take 10 parts water to 1 part bleach. You put that in there, and you can just scrub the walls down with whatever, a sponge, an old t-shirt, just scrub down all the walls, rinse it really well, and then let it air dry. Right now, we're still kind of on the tail end of summer, heading into fall, and you can still let your container air dry in the sun for 24 hours. And then at that point, it's ready to use again. When you put 0 TDS RO water in there, it's going to stay 0 until you add the salt. And then, of course, salt is a contaminant in itself. So as soon as you add salt, you can't measure the TDS anymore. But the next time you fill your container, you may notice that your number is a little higher if you were to measure the TDS of the barrel of water that you just poured in. And that's because the container is not pristine anymore. So if you're cleaning it once or twice a year, you're staying ahead of it, you're avoiding just making the water excessively dirty with too much total dissolved solids with every water change you do. So we do want, and I talked with Chris yesterday. He called me up and he said, hey, I'm having a problem with my RODI system. And so we talked about it, and he's got quite the setup. He's cobbled together so many components to build this ultimate system. And his RO water, the water coming out of the membrane, was measuring 14, but the water coming out of the DI stage was coming out 18. I said, well, at this point, you're better off just using the RO water, and you're going to have to look at the DI section and see what's going on, why it's not pulling out TDS, and why it's actually adding some back in, because we don't want that. We want our water to be as clean as possible. But since his source water is 400, for him to use 14 right now would be okay. Yes, we shoot for 0. That's the ideal number. But anything less than the giant number that's coming out of your tap would be far better than doing nothing at all. So if you're trying to make top-off water, or if you're trying to make salt water, we want to have very clean containers that we store that water in, so as it's being added to our tank, whether it's top-off or it's a water change that's being performed, we are putting in cleaner stuff than what we're taking out. And if you've ever done this, if you have 2 white buckets, you can have your brand new batch of salt water in one bucket, and you can drain 5 gallons of water out of your reef that's dirty water, and you can look at them side by side, and you can see how dirty your water really is. So it's called the bucket test, and you'll see that one bucket is kind of like yellow, and the other one is nice and clear, and you're like, okay, I want to pump that into my tank because my tank needs nice clean water. So the discoloration of the water is natural. It's from all the organics that are in our system, and part of what removes yellowing from water would be running carbon, ideally in a reactor, and not just sitting in a pouch in the bottom of the sump. So if you do that once a month for a few days, you will definitely polish the water and make the clarity look better. And if you have a longer aquarium and you're viewing it from the end, looking the full length, you can totally see when a tank hasn't had carbon run versus when you do run carbon for a few days. And when you look through it again, it'll look nice and clear. And then, you know, after 3 or 4 days, just turn off the carbon, remove the reactor, rinse it out, get it ready for next month. But in the meantime, your tank will start to get a little bit more and more murky, and then eventually you're going to have to run carbon again. But the water changes are also taking out organics. So you've got two different things that help filter your water. One is a mechanical filtration, and then the other one is going to be absorption through carbon. So those are a couple of choices you can do. Okay. Michael says, off topic, what are your thoughts on Priscilla Pora? Just got a nice colony yesterday. I like it. I have 2 of them in my tank. They're small and they have not spread. And people say, oh, they'll, I mean, I know they do it. People will warn you that they'll spread, that they'll just throw a polyp and it'll land somewhere else and suddenly it's growing on the glass or it's growing on the plumbing. And that's okay. I mean, if you like Priscilla Pora, you're going to have it in more places than one in your tank. For me, I've planted 2 different places in my tank a year ago, and they're a little bit bigger, but they have not spread whatsoever. And if they were to spread, it's sort of like, you know, an anemone wandering or fungias moving across the sand bed. You either put them back where you want them, or you remove the extras, you sell the frags, you give them to the fish store for credit. You know, there's lots of different things you can do, but if you're in a situation where you're growing it abundantly and you have way too much of it, then you may need to actually go in there and cull and remove a lot of it to get things under control again. Kevin says, I want to run my RODI unit directly into my return chamber. What's the best way? What are the backups? Float valves versus sensors? I don't recommend that at all. I'm totally opposed to it, and I have an entire article on my website explaining all the reasons why you should never do this. I understand the desire to do it. I can't fault you for wanting to run 1/4-inch tubing all the way to your aquarium and then just be able to turn on the RO system and let it just trickle in quietly and you have to lift a bucket. But the problem is, whatever system you have, whether it's a 75-gallon a day, a 100-gallon a day, a 150-gallon a day system, if for some reason it does not turn off, it will literally flood your tank and the sump and everything and overflow it over a 24-hour period. I mean, think about it. You are going out of town. This thing has worked perfectly for you for months, if not years, and then something goes wrong as soon as you're away. And it will keep adding water. And if it's, like I said, it's a 75-gallon a day, it'll add 75 gallons in 24 hours. How much can your sump hold? Can it hold 75 extra gallons? And can your salinity handle that big of a swing from that much water going in? Using floats and solenoids do help, but the thing that they don't help with is TDS creep, and they don't help with the lifespan of your membrane. So normally when we top off our tanks, if we're topping it off manually, we do it once a day. Hopefully. Some of you don't. Some of you wait till it's this far down, like, okay, let me pour some water in to bring it back up, which is a huge swing, and I don't recommend it. And I used to do that back when I didn't know what I was doing either. I just was lazy, and I was like, I'll do it in a few days. But once you set up an automated system, you'll discover it's adding water every few hours. And it may top off your tank 4, 6, 8 times a day to raise it up that little bit that evaporated. And if your RODI system turned on 4, 6, 8 times a day, what's happening is every single time it turns on, the TDS that's sitting on the membrane, that will flow first through the tubing and into the DI stage, and the DI resin will burn up much more quickly. And you can actually test this if you have an inline TDS meter. You turn on the system and you measure the RO water. Just watch the meter as soon as you turn on the system, and you'll see the number go from probably, say, 0 or something like that. It could be 85, 160, 190, and it comes down to 85 and 60 and 40 and 12, and finally it's 8, and then maybe it's 4. And then at that point, it's the lowest it can possibly be, and now it's putting 4 TDS into your DI stage, and your DI polishes off the last. But when you first turned it on and it got over 100, you sent 100 TDS into the DI and just wasted resin. Now, if you do that 4, 6, 8 times a day, you're burning up the resin in your DI stage, which costs money. And that's probably, it's nearly the most expensive part of your RO system. And the membrane gets really worn out too by cycling on and off so frequently. So if you're trying to completely automate this, you're like, look, I have to do this. I need floats and I want solenoids and all that. In theory, you could set it up with an Apex controller or something similar to where you only allow it to run once a day. It runs good and hard for 2 hours, but it's still, you're going to need extra solenoids to burn off 2 minutes of RO water before you send water into the DI stage, and that way your DI lasts much longer so that you can be hands-free. I just don't recommend doing any of that. I just think it's so much better to just have that manual part of you turn it on, you let it run for 90 seconds. I literally set the timer on my watch, and I will just tell it, set timer 90 seconds. And then after 90 seconds, my wristwatch is vibrating. And trust me, I always forget that I turned it on, and this thing starts vibrating. And I'm like, oh yeah, because I just don't stand there looking at it for 90 seconds. I turn it on and I go into the kitchen and I pour myself a drink, or I start cleaning the glass, or I'm staring at a cucumber, or whatever it is I'm doing that's so, distracting. And then if I don't set the timer, I walk into the room where the RO system is and there's water on the floor because it's overflowing. It's been overflowing for 20 minutes or an hour and a half or whatever because I was an idiot. So I always set a timer on my watch. My watch vibrates. If I don't have my watch on me for some reason, I would set the timer on my phone and put it in my pocket, and to remind me it's been 90 seconds. And now I can close the RO valve and I can open the DI valve and I can start sending DI water to a reservoir. So that's what I would recommend you do. If you can set up a reservoir near your tank that can hold 8 gallons, 10 gallons, 12 gallons of water, and there's a float valve inside there, then you can turn on the RO system, burn off the TDS creep, close the valve after 90 seconds, open the valve to go to your reservoir, let it fill that reservoir all the way up. The float valve will rise. It will try to stop the water from coming out of your RODI system, and it'll kind of turn it off, but it will shudder to life as a little bit of water bleeds past the rubber flapper, and it will turn on and off and on and off and on and off, kind of rapidly. Like every 15 seconds, you'll hear brrr, and you're like, what's that sound? Brrr, what's that sound? And it's just happening. And then you're like, oh yeah. And you go over there and you literally turn it off. And now it's off for like a week or so. And in the meantime, you've got water in a reservoir that you can put a tiny pump in that can put water into your sump as needed 6-8 times a day. You don't have a TDS problem. You don't have too much water. Even if the automated top-off system messes up and puts in all of that water at once, it's probably not enough water to hurt your tank versus a 100-gallon a day that's running wild. So there was a household that I helped with their tank. They were club members years ago, and they had a 400-gallon aquarium, and they had a shop vac on the floor in the living room right next to it. And I said, what's this for? And they said, we flood this room all the time. We're just used to shop vacuuming the carpet. I was like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, we put our RO system outside next to the garden hose connection, and we run the tube through the window into the tank or into the sump, and we just turn it on and we forget. And then the sump's overflowing and the water's flowing across the carpet. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is a terrible system. So, the first thing I did was I got them a float. I actually made them a top-off container. I put a float valve in it, and no more flooded living rooms, which is really good. I mean, accidents happen, but that should not be happening. So I would highly recommend squeezing in a reservoir under your tank. And if you cannot put it under the tank, you can put one next to the tank. And you can either mask it by hiding it in something, like a small cabinet from IKEA or Walmart, or wherever you can find a small little side cabinet. Or you could take a basket and flip it upside down and put a fake plant on top, and now it's just a thing that looks nice to anyone else. And when you need to refill it, you literally take the basket off and you observe it being filled up, or you add water into it manually, however you do it. But this way, you've got a good way to top off your system automatically that's not an eyesore and won't offend your spouse. Alan says, do you guys use, you guys, Instant Ocean Reef Crystals? I'm new. That is one brand I've never used. Reef Crystals, I never did. I did use Instant Ocean back in the day. I used Oceanic. I used Cybon for years because I bought a pallet of it. I used Red Sea Pro Reef. I've used Fritz. And I've been using Aquavitro Salinity for the last, 7 years. Michael says, I can do an 80-gallon water change without shutting off any pumps. One of the positives about having an equipment room. Yeah, I would agree. As I was pumping water out last night from the Reef, so what I did was I pumped out the skimmer section, And then I pumped out the return zone. And what I use is that Sicce utility pump that has, I think it's a 1-inch output. And I jam a braided hose that's 45 feet long on top of that pump, and I just run the tube down the driveway. And I turn it on, and it sucks out all the water, and then I just move the entire pump assembly into the next section of my sump and pump that all out. And then when it's done, I usually would stop. But last night I said I want to do a bigger water change than what was in the sump. So I went ahead and I lowered the pump with its tubing and the cord into the reef behind the Pora. And I was very careful that it only went down a certain amount. And then I watched the water level drop in my tank. Oh, I'd say about 4 or 5 inches. And at that point, you know, the water would be coming out the nozzles, the return line, but the pump was off. And when I did turn the pump on, I went ahead and I turned it to a slower flow rate because I didn't want it to blast into my tank at 80% of what it can do. So I had it around 45%. I was going to say PSI, but that's not right. So the pump was running about 45%. Water was squirting in. You could hear it. And it was still pumping water out, but it was sending water from the sump into the tank. And then I had water from my big saltwater container going into the sump. So I was kind of thinking I'm probably wasting some of my brand new water that's going into the tank by pumping out. And so after about 2 minutes of that, I just stopped. And I ended up changing about 135 gallons yesterday, 134. And that was good enough for last night. And like I said, I'm looking forward to doing the other 80, and then I'll refill my container to the top again and make a new batch of saltwater again. And I have a brand new barrel that I haven't opened yet, so I'm going to be making a batch of saltwater with that. And I'm going to be sending off an ICP sample on Monday to see what is in the new salt mix to make sure everything's good, so I don't get any ugly surprises like last year. Paul says, do you subscribe to Ultramarine magazine? No, I've only seen one issue of that over the years. I think someone used some of my pictures, and so they sent me the article so I could see my pictures in use. And that's the only time I've ever seen that magazine. I do subscribe to Coral Magazine, and I get that every 2 months. Let's see. My monitor's just a little too far away. I'm trying to understand this. So JH wrote, oh, he's asking Ray. Sorry. It's a private conversation. Never mind. Do not look at this. So 53 Mordor Belair says, is the automatic water change method better than a 10 or 20% change? That's kind of, it's not really a debate. And there's been some articles. So Randy Holmes Farley wrote an article on this topic probably 16, 17 years ago, where he talked about changing a small amount of water every single day for 30 days in a row versus changing a large body of water. And the numbers were so close that it was kind of negligible. So you have a little bit more efficacy by changing a large amount manually one time than to take out a little bit every month. You know, and he did all the graphs, and he crunched all the numbers. And then at MACNA last weekend, or 2 weekends ago, Sanjay Yoshi gave a talk about reducing nitrate, and he was showing how if you had a tank that had 40 ppm nitrate and you changed 60% of your water, he said your nitrate would be 20. But if you did, I think he said 8 or 10 water changes that were smaller over a period of time, then you would have reduced the nitrate down to like 28. So I was thinking, well, why would I want to do 8 times as much work to get less results on nitrates? Because nitrates is the thing I care about. I always want that number down. I'm mad that it's up. I want to fix it. And so I'd much rather do a really big water change and cut them in half immediately. And a 50% water change of your reef will always cut your nitrate in half. So if you could do a 50% water change, a 50% water change, a 50% water change, a 50% water change, you could take nitrate from 80 to 40 to 20 to 10. So the trick is you have to have the abundance of water for you to pull that off, you need a really large container. Now, if you have a 55-gallon aquarium and you have a few of the rubber trash cans that hold 33 gallons each, you could basically mix up roughly 100 gallons of water at one time. You could have multiples going and just have these ready to go, and you could rock and roll for the next week and change water every other day. And you could completely bring that nitrate down to something much more reasonable, to where the natural filtration and the biological filter in your tank can handle maintaining that low number. I wish I could figure out what caused my number to rise, and I talked with multiple people about it, and it seems like the biggest likelihood would be feeding, but I only feed frozen once a day, and it's gone within 2 minutes. So I just don't think that's... And plus, I've been feeding the same way forever. So why did it change 2 months ago and just keep going up and up? I don't know. I haven't figured it out. I'd love to know what caused it so I can avoid making that mistake again, or permitting it to happen. But in the meantime, I'm just going to handle it and get the number back where it needs to be. Scott says the Peacemaker is working out great. I'm glad to hear that, Scott. Let's see. Reef Madness says, you're streaming in comfort. Yeah, I wanted to be comfortable today. Wanted to just try something out. Paul says, I have put 3 different types of macroalgae in the back of my all-in-one tank. I use Ketomorpha or Ketomax as my light for the macroalgae. I don't understand. Should I put an airstone in? Well, Ketomorpha, I've heard many times it does best if it's tumbling a little bit. So I don't know if there's enough room in the back of your all-in-one for the algae to tumble. But you would have to put something in there like a small power head that could keep that thing going, like a little bowling ball in the rail going, terrible analogy. But if you can keep it turning, or if you manually turned it over each day, just reached in and plucked it out and turned it and put it back in, you could possibly do that. It's best if the Ketomorph is pulled apart a little bit so flow can go through it as well, so it's not a dense little knot of algae. But you said you've put 3 different types of macroalgae in, but you didn't say if they're all dying. Right? So I don't know what's happening. Clearly something's not right because you're asking for some assistance. But the lighting of it, are you doing the reverse light cycle, or are you running the light 24 hours a day? I mean, these are all things that I would have to know more to answer that question, or to understand your question better. Hey, that was nice. Salibus said, this is Andrew from Wisconsin. We met after Dennis spoke at MACNA. And glad you had a safe trip. Props to you for just being as approachable in person as you are on your stream. Well, I try to be the same guy all the time. This isn't an act. So, I mean, yeah, sure, I have off days. But in general, I love being at conferences and being around other hobbyists and talking with them about their tanks, seeing pictures of what they've got going on, and sometimes answering questions as they come up. Winterwater says, I have to raise alkalinity in my new water bucket. Shouldn't I have to also add the correct ratio of calcium and magnesium as well? Well, hopefully the calcium and the magnesium are already fine. It seems like alkalinity is the one thing that dissipates or precipitates or isn't right. I was talking with someone yesterday who said the brand of salt I have right now, and he had 2 more buckets of it. He says it measures too high in alkalinity after I mix it up, and I want to use the salt because he paid for it, but I don't want to put in that high alkalinity into my tank, and how can I bring it down? And I explained to him that if you just have the salt water in circulation, that it will start to come down on its own over a period of days. But there are other methods, like adding a little bit of white vinegar to bring alkalinity down in the water. and that could be another method to correct an inadequacy of the salt water. So if your brand new batch of salt water has been mixed up, you can do all the tests. You can measure alkalinity, calcium, magnesium, and you can see what they are. And odds are calcium and magnesium are going to be right about the right level that match your tank already, which would be ideal, and then you can just do your water change. But keep in mind too, you do your water change, and then in theory, I'm just going to assume you, okay, let me not assume anything. Some people do water changes every single week. Others do them once a month. Some people do them sporadically like me, and that might be every 2 or 3 months a water change happens. So all the other times when a water change isn't happening, you're dosing your tank for calcium and magnesium and alkalinity. So even if you had a batch that was low, you're going to be dosing soon to bring it back within range anyway. Now, if it's terribly low, like it's a bad batch, and let's say you mixed up, a 33-gallon trash can full of water, and you measured it and alkalinity was 11, and you're like, okay, that's okay, I guess. And then you said calcium is 380, you're like, that's a little bit low, and magnesium's 1100, you're like, oh, that's really low. That would be a situation where you'd have to buffer all, the other two and totally ignore alkalinity. But typically, calcium and magnesium in a brand new batch of salt is higher because there are a lot of people out there that don't run a reef tank, that just have fish only with rock. And when they do a water change, they are replacing or replenishing the calcium and the magnesium with every water change. So you really have to know, and so you have to measure everything. So that's why when I open a brand new container of salt, whether it's a box, a bag, a barrel, a bucket, I mix up my whole batch of salt water, and then I measure alkalinity, salinity, temperature, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. Because I unfortunately had a really bad deficiency of potassium a year ago in an entire barrel of salt, and it really hurt my reef. So I double check all of them. And that's why when I open this brand new barrel for my next batch of salt water, I'm going to send it off to ICP and see what the numbers come back, because they measure calcium, magnesium, potassium. I'm already measuring other things anyway, so I'll get confirmation on how that new barrel will mix. And if I get a good result, then I'll feel very comfortable with the rest of that barrel. I'm looking for the next question. Nice. Well, Reefer Madness, I appreciate that. Whenever it can get here, that'll be nice. Thank you very much for thinking about me again. I didn't mention this at all because we went off on a tangent about automatic water changes. But generally speaking, in the old days, a 25% water change was all you had to do for your tank. And that was once a month. So the people that change water every single week, I feel like some change the water so frequently because they don't want to dose anything. And so they're hoping it'll keep up. And if it doesn't quite keep up, then they start using kalkwasser in their top-off to help keep it up as well. So you've got water changes and kalkwasser top-off as your system because you're avoiding the dosing pumps and the use of the 3-part DIY mix, which would be alkalinity solution, calcium solution, and magnesium solution. But generally speaking, even with my tank, I'm fine with changing 25% of my tank once a month. And I just don't. I do it less frequently than that. But I think about it, my reef just has grown. I had one person just comment yesterday saying, I cannot believe how fast your reef has grown in. It's just so beautiful. It's so stunning. And you just turned around in no time. I was like, well, once I figured out the deficiency last year and I replaced what was missing, the corals that remained healed immediately, and then the new ones I planted, they grew. And then over the last couple of months, I dosed a lot of trace elements on a daily basis, and I was trying to see how that would affect the tank, and it definitely affected it in a good way, which was a nice thing. I mean, that's what you would expect, but it was nice to actually see it happen. And I had someone just ask me yesterday if I could give them more information about the ICP test company I'm using, which is Reef Labs out of Florida. So I sent them some screenshots. They just updated their website again. So, when you log in to see your results, you're getting more and more information. And it's getting more and more fleshed out. And I was clicking on things I couldn't click on before, and I was learning more about things, which was really, really neat. But the other thing is that by then I took all those results that I'd been getting week after week after week, and I put them in a huge spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet gets wider and wider. Every time I do a test, there's a new column. And so I was able to send that to that same person because he's a chemistry guy. And he wanted to see, was I getting decent results week after week because I was doing weekly ICP testing, or were the numbers wacky? Like, this week was crazy iodine, and this week is crazy manganese, and this week is crazy iron or whatever. But no, you could actually see my numbers were only going up and down a little tiny bit. And I didn't do graphs. I literally put in numbers. So, I mean, you could actually see the ratios were staying where they needed to be. But again, it's a balancing act of getting everything to be right at the same time and keeping those ratios in mind. You hear a lot of people mention the Redfield ratio all the time when it comes to nitrate and phosphate. And with my nitrates as high as they've been, I have basically ignored my phosphate in the tank. I'm not even trying to reduce it because I don't want to have low phosphate and high nitrate. I want them to be relatively close to where they should be as a ratio. Not that I'm pursuing it. All I want to do is get them both down at the same time. So water changes is a good starting point, and then I'll measure and see where my numbers are. I think I'll be measuring today, do my water change tonight, and measure again tomorrow and see how that played out. And then I might go ahead and put the nitrate R resin back in a reactor one more time and let it help dissipate the nitrate that has accumulated in my system. I'm also going to do some more spring cleaning. I'm having a really hard time working under the tank right now because the anemone cube is not running yet. And once that is operational again, I'll have more room in the fish room to easily get into the sump, to clean the sump out, to pull the protein skimmer out and clean it top to bottom and get it, back to peak efficiency. I want to also, now this I can do now, and I might do it tonight since I'm doing this water change. I'm going to work on cleaning all the sediment out of the refugium zone that's all trapped inside the reborn calcium reactor media that I used as my substrate. And I want to go ahead and just turn that all over, and I want to pump that all out, get out all the detritus I can. And in a situation where if you're trying to remove a lot of detritus from a tank, you can do this especially well in a water change. So we didn't even talk about during the water change, like how you get water out and how you get water in other than pumping it, but I didn't go into some specifics. So let me tell you a couple of ideas that I've used over the years. Back in the day when I had that 29 gallon that ran for so long, I used crushed coral, which was the worst choice of substrate for a reef tank. And I just used it because that's what I used as a kid, and that's what my dad used in his aquarium. So I bought crushed coral, but it traps a massive amount of waste, very hard to clean. So you can use a gravel vac and you can suck out tons of brown, disgusting water out. And so I remember doing that when I had to move the tank out of the living room and off. And basically I put it outside because I was replacing the carpet in the house. And so when that happened, I said, okay, I'm going to clean out this gravel. And so I did a gravel vac and removed a lot of brown stuff. And then I poured more salt water in, and I continued gravel vacuuming, and I put more salt water again until I really got all the substrate clean. And then I was like, okay, now I can be happy with it. And my nitrates came down, so it worked. So the same thing goes if I'm cleaning out my refugium zone and I'm removing all the detritus down there, and I get to the point where there's not enough water left to keep cleaning, I'll just add more salt water in there and continue cleaning until I finish the task. And once it's completed, then I can go ahead and refill with more salt water to, complete the water change. So that's one thing. Now, another thing about water changes that you might want to create, maybe you'd like to set up a system to where you drain out a fixed amount without having to babysit it the entire time. Now, I'm not talking about automatic water changes now. I'm talking about physically you have a trash can or you have a bucket in front of your tank that's empty, and then you have your new one with, you know, the new salt water ready to go. You can actually, you know, you could take a hose and you could put it in the tank, and you could start a siphon by sucking on the end of the hose, or put the hose on your return nozzle to start water through it and create the flow that sends it down to the bucket. But now you're standing there waiting and waiting and waiting, and you're watching the bucket fill up, and you don't dare move. If you let go of the hose, it flops out, water goes all over the floor. If you walk away, the bucket overflows because there's too much water because it didn't stop. I mean, there's a couple things that can go wrong there, even if you've kind of clamped it or put the lid on top of the hose to try and hold it. We all know what happens. It doesn't hold it. It holds for a few seconds till you look away, and then Murphy goes and knocks it out of its position, and, you know, you got to start throwing down towels on the floor again. But what you can do if you want to make your life a little bit easier, and you know exactly how much water you want to take out every single time for that water change, you can actually, like, let's say you have a 60-gallon cube and you want to take out this much water, which is maybe 7-8 inches of water. You can actually make a PVC apparatus that hangs on the tank. So you've got PVC pipe that goes to an elbow, got another elbow that goes down with another elbow that faces forward. And you could even have a threaded elbow to where you can put a strainer in there. So when you hook this thing on the tank to start your water change, you don't suck a clownfish out down into your bucket accidentally, okay? So the strainer could be a smart move to keep livestock in the tank if you're not babysitting it. You start your water change however you want to start it, like we talked about before. You put this hanger on the tank, and it will just drain water out until it hits the strainer / the elbow and sucks in air, and it breaks the siphon. And then your bucket on the floor should not overfill. It should literally be the right amount, and it's what you expected. And then you've got your other bucket with a pump and some tubing, and you pump it right back in. So the hanger system is a really nice method. And one of my friends, he was draining the water from his tank right out the window onto the ground. And so I actually was at his house. I said, you got any PVC? We're going to make you this cool little hanger. And we glued it all together, and we stuck it on the tank. And he just hangs it on there, and he starts the water change out the window. And then it breaks the siphon automatically. And then he turned on water in the basement to refill the sump, turned on the return pump and pushed water up, and it filled the tank up, and everything was done. And he didn't have to lift any buckets or carry anything, and he was super happy with that method. So you could do something like that if you'd like to make your life a little bit easier. Also, when you're putting water back into the tank, my dad did this a long time ago, and this is when we didn't know better. He found this attachment that goes on a garden hose that was made of aluminum. It had a lot of holes in it. It was like a basket that screwed onto the garden hose connection. And he put that in the tank, and so as he was pushing water in, it would dissipate in the basket out the little holes, and it didn't like blast the substrate or shoot water at the livestock. So I wouldn't use aluminum, obviously, but I would say if you can find something made of plastic, if you can rig some kind of a connection on the end of your tubing where the water's going in. Another method I love to do when I'm moving a lot of water rapidly is I will put a filter sock over the end of the tube and push the tubing into the tank, and I just hit the pump and let it shoot the water in, but it's pounding the filter sock and water's going out into the tank, and it's not shooting a jet of water at my rock work or at my sand bed. So there's a couple of ways that you can reduce the pressure of the water shooting out of the hose back into the display that could disturb the livestock and even stress it. So that's something that I'm sure you can come up with some cool ideas. I just kind of wanted to put the thought in your head. There are ways to do things that are even better than how it really started in the first place. Big E says, your big tank looks beautiful as always. I've had my cube up and running for 5 years and just started getting hair algae. What do you suggest? It may be time for a new cleanup crew. And it's just you've got some stuff in there, but not what you used to have in the old days. It could be that the spectrum of your lighting has shifted. Maybe your light fixture is 5 years old as well, or you're running a different light cycle than you did in the past that has encouraged some algae growth. It could be a combination of things. It could be the tank is 5 years old and it's starting to get more organics in it, which is providing more phosphate to fuel the algae growth in your tank. And so deep cleaning is the first step. Anything that you can remove from the tank and scrub in the sink, whether you have the lock line nozzles that the water comes out of, from the return lines, or it could be a cleaning magnet that's fuzzy looking, or you might have a frag rack in there that's growing hair algae. Take all those things you can take out of the tank and go scrub them clean in the sink and put the clean plastic back in, screw the lock line back on, put the frag rack back where you wanted it, whatever. But I mean, just remove what you can. And then any algae you have in the tank, I would reach in with my hand and I would pinch it off, take my hand out of the tank, put in a bowl of water and rinse my fingers clean, reach in and do this over and over and over. And you said your tank's a 60-gallon. It's not a massive job, but you will need a step stool to do this job. And you'll just kind of reach in and pull out as much as you can possibly stand. And then you're done. You're like, okay, I can't do it. I'm sick of this. And you stop, you take a break, and the next day or the day after that, you do it again. But just kind of manually pull out. You can be the cleanup crew, right? And you can remove as much as you physically can reach, one pinch at a time. And the reason I'm saying pinch is you grab the algae and you yank it off the rock and you rinse your fingers. You're not sending it loose into the tank. If you have a toothbrush and you're scrubbing, it's just going everywhere and landing somewhere else to grow again. And you're just seeding the whole tank with more algae. So I pinch it off, remove it, rinse my fingers, back in the tank over and over and over, and then go buy some cleanup crew and get some hermit crabs and get some snails and get them in the tank and put them where you need them. If you see a snail way over here in this corner and you got the algae right here, grab that snail and put it back in the algae and make them do the job you hired them to do. So that way you'll have a nice clean tank again. Also, you want to make sure that your nitrate and your phosphate are in the right levels. And your phosphate might measure low even though you have hair algae. So after you've pinched off a bunch of algae, 20 minutes later, test the phosphate and see if your number's still magically low or if it's actually higher, because it could be the phosphate is bound up in the algae and it's fueling its own growth. So we want to make sure we're eliminating phosphate from the system to hamper its growth, and we want to rip it out manually, and we want to put in creatures in there to devour it, and then your tank will be pretty again. I am fortunate that my tanks never really deal with hair algae. There's a little bit of algae happening in Caitlin's Reef, but the same, hey, it's really dim because it went to its normal schedule now. It'll get brighter here in a little while. But I don't want to put in anything that's going to devour my cool-looking macroalgae. So for now, I'm just manually pruning what I want to remove. I'm actually enjoying leaving it alone as much as possible. I was in there looking, and just as a quick update, I can tell you there are 19 frags of zoanthids in there. There are 4 keyhole limpets. There are 5 hidden sea cucumbers. There's, of course, the 3 fish, which is the Japanese pygmy angelfish. There's the Randall goby, and there is the purple Helfriki firefish. And then there is now the pistol shrimp. And I added 1 red scarlet hermit crab because I like scarlets. They're really pretty, and I'm not wanting it to do any work. It can do what it wants. It can crawl around in the sand and kind of stir it up, and it might eat a little bit of algae, but it's not a big enough hermit to destroy all my really pretty macroalgae, which I'm hoping it will leave alone. There's also a walking dendro in there. There are 2 different recordias. One recordia that's not big, but it has 4 mouths in it. So at some point it's going to split, and then I'll have a couple, hopefully. I've never had much luck with recordia. I'm hoping that tank will be dirty enough to where recordia does well, and we'll just have to see. Also, I'm enjoying the airstone in there, and I know a lot of people said that's so old school, and I did it for aesthetic reasons, really. But it's also there for oxygen levels because the tank is sealed on the top. There is a solid lid on the top with only a little gap to put wires in. It's cut out around the light fixture arm, and there's a hole for the pH probe to fit in there. But essentially, there's no gas exchange without the air pump. So that air pump is really good. And with the air pump plugged into a battery backup, if there's a power outage, the airstone will continue to run as long as the UPS has enough battery life to run it. So it is a safety margin as well, and that's why I set it up that way. But one of the cool things that I get to enjoy when I look in that tank, and you can't see it in the video, it's too far away right now, but I did share a brief video on Instagram yesterday that you might see it if you look closely. Because the air bubbles are rising and creating like all these bubbles on the surface, it's like clouds. And so you'll see like the light, and then it's not glimmer lines, but it's more like cloud cover and clouds breaking and light coming through it, like sunlight shining through. And it's kind of a pleasant effect. So I'm really enjoying the airstone in there, even though I know it's completely opposite what anyone ever does with a reef tank these days. Larry says, are you also discussing salt mixes? What are your thoughts of Aquaforest Probiotic? I don't have an opinion on Aquaforest. I know nothing about that brand at all. I mean, I've seen it. I know I'm aware of it, but I have no experience or knowledge that I can share from that one at all. Out of all the salt mixes I've used, there's only one that I actually literally walked away from in disgust and said I'd never use it again. And they don't exist, so it's okay for me to talk about them because I'm not destroying the company. But for a brief period of time, Oceanic came out with their own brand of salt, and it was super dirty. It was so bad. And you would mix up your barrel of salt water, or in your case, maybe it's a bucket, depending on the size of your aquarium. And there was this brown muck on the surface and brown film and brown on the edges. It was so gross. And I tried several buckets of it and it never got cleaner. I said, nope, I'm done with this brand. I'm not using it anymore. I want a nice clean container. Mike says, is it possible to convert a CO2 reactor into a carbon reactor? I don't know. Are you talking about a CO2 reactor designed specifically for like your freshwater tank, maybe? Because we use CO2 tanks for calcium reactors, but I don't think you're saying it's a calcium reactor, are you? Feel free to ask me more and I'll see what I can do to answer that question, if I happen to know the answer. Rob says, I do 20% every 8-ish weeks, spread out over 4 days so I don't have to buffer my new water. Yeah, because you're buffering their tank anyway every single day. So in a way, it should work out if you're doing smaller water changes. A Goodwin says, we talk a lot about tank stability, and I sometimes wonder, when we use big water changes to correct large errors in water chemistry, we risk a swing. Can you do too big a water change? In theory, if everything matches, you could do 100% water change and it wouldn't affect anything because it would just be nice, clean water. And I like to compare that to like a room full of smoke. You open the doors and windows to bring fresh air in as quickly as possible so you can quit choking to death. So in that principle, yes, you can change a massive amount of water and it won't hurt the livestock. If everything matches, if salinity, temperature, calcium, magnesium, potassium, pH, iron, manganese, flora, if every single thing was the exact same, you could completely change all the water and it wouldn't be affected at all. But we don't necessarily get that precise. But we do care about the big elements. And in the case last year where I lost a bunch of coral, that was when I was missing a major element that was less. It was drastically less. And it's potassium. So at that time, your tank should be 400 ppm. That's what calcium's supposed to be. Think about that. It's a big deal. And yet most people never give potassium a second thought, including myself. I didn't think about it for 24 years. And then last year, I learned the hard way, potassium matters. And so it was very important. And when I checked my tank, when I was trying to understand what was happening, and I couldn't understand why I was losing coral, and I sent off my tests, my tank was measuring less than 200 ppm. It was 50% less. And when I checked my brand new batch of salt water that I was using for water changes, it was measuring 114. It was a quarter of what potassium should have been. And that was when I found that my salt mix had a problem. And at that point, I stopped using that water, threw it all away. And I had a brand new barrel that I had just bought that day. So I opened it up and I made a new batch of salt water and sent an ICP test off, and it came back 435. I was like, okay, I can trust this batch. And I've been using that barrel ever since. And that's the one I just finished with this current batch of 250 gallons of water. So I'm about to open a brand new barrel again to make a new batch. I'm going to send off a test just to verify that this barrel is good and safe. And I don't really like that I have to pay to test it, but at the same time, the peace of mind is kind of worth the money because I do want to make sure my reef is happy. But in theory, they should be doing their job and the salt should be perfect every single time we open a bag, barrel, box. and we should be able to just do our water changes and just mix it up and do our change. But, you know, to get back to your question about stability, if everything matches, it is a stable water change, whether it's 5 gallons or 500 gallons, because it's all matching. But if we're trying to correct a deficiency, like in the case of my tank being really low in potassium, it was better for me to just pump in potassium into the tank every single day than to do more water changes. So in that situation last year, I didn't do any more water changes. I did my big water change. My tank had a major issue that was frustrating, and I watched a lot of things die, but I also watched about 50% of my stuff was completely fine, didn't care whatsoever. And that was really important, by the way, because it's so easy to fixate on what's missing or what's lost that you start to, you know, really dislike your tank. And I had to stand back and look and appreciate how much was still fine to help myself get through that mental hurdle, to appreciate what was doing well so I wouldn't give up, you know, so I'd maintain a positive outlook. And then all I did was literally dose every single day potassium for 3 weeks. And once I got my numbers back up to 400, the tank healed. That was it. And then, I don't know, I did a water change a few months later. So in that situation, I didn't. Now, if you're trying to change water to fix, I'm trying to think of scenarios. Like phosphates are crazy high and nitrates high. You do a big water change, the whole reef will love it. If you had really bad alkalinity, a big water change might help stabilize it to where you can start buffering and bringing the numbers closer to where they belong. So sometimes a big water change is necessary as a reset because numbers are so out of whack. Now, why are they so out of whack? Because that person was not testing the water every single week. Because if they were testing every single week, it couldn't get that far out of whack. They would have noticed there's a slight issue. They would have made a slight adjustment on their dosing pump or on, you know, how they handle their water changes or whatever they're doing, and they would fix the little things, and it never gets out of whack. But usually what happens is we get complacent, everything looks fine, water changes are a hassle, and so they say everything's fine. And, you know, mentally, like, it looks good. You know, if there was a problem, the corals would tell me. If there was a problem, my fish would tell me. And so they don't do these things. And then one day they test, like, oh my God, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong. And we say, do a big water change to kind of normalize everything. And then you can just buffer those last things up to where they belong to get things just right. So I hope that kind of answered your question. I'm not trying to dodge it at all. It is a legitimate question. Is it going to hurt the tank? But if the tank's already unstable, what can we do to stabilize it? Usually the big water change is the first step to stabilize something. Unfortunately, most of us don't have nearly enough salt water on hand to fix a big disaster. Like, for example, if your tank had a kalkwasser overdose, and kalkwasser has a pH of 12, and if all that water goes into your tank and the whole tank turns milky white, 100% water change would be the best solution, but most of us can't do that. So in that scenario, you'd actually be better off grabbing all the salt water you have and put it in a separate container, whether it's a trough, an aquarium, anything, and start moving livestock into the clean water rather than wasting your good water in your milky tank because you don't have enough to solve the problem. It's so bad, everything's just dying. It's a domino effect, it's an avalanche, it's a disaster, and you're just reaching in and trying to pull out all the livestock you can in that scenario. So that's why I'm saying it'd be almost better to just set up a 40-gallon breeder really quick. You know, obviously for a 400 that wouldn't help me, but if you had a 90-gallon or 120-gallon, if you could set up a 40 breeder immediately and start moving things over, you could save soft corals, you could save fish, you could grab some invertebrates and rescue things from the milky soup that is the main tank because of the disaster. So. Michael says, I do 20% every 2 weeks, a bit more than most people, but my tank seems to like it. And there's nothing wrong with that. If your tank's doing well and the system works for you, I don't want to talk you into changing anything. And that's not the point of these discussions. Usually I'm trying to fill in some information to help people understand their choices or to give them some backstories of why we do the things we do. But if your tank is doing well and you come to my channel and you hear something that I say is different, but everything's going well, I'm not going to tell you to suddenly stop what you're doing because it's working for you. But if you do have problems with your tank and this information helps you, I'm glad. Let's see. Burke says they change their water every week, 20%. So you're doing 80% water changes a month. That's a lot. Ballpark. Emmanuel says, how can you do such a large water change without bottoming out your phosphates? Well, when you have phosphates like I do, you don't worry about bottoming them out. Actually, I never bottom out my phosphates. Even when I use lanthanum chloride to go ahead and bring them down, I never get them to zero. They come down, but they are not down at nothing. Okay, so Paul, back to your question about the macroalgae. It could be there's a lack of flow. I don't think an air stone would necessarily help, but you could try it. But you'll probably have to put something on the top to deal with the salt creep, because you're going to get salt spatter. It's just going to happen. You can't help it because the bubbles are popping near the surface. But some kind of circulation in that macroalgae could help it live more. Or it could be your tank is just, I mean, I don't know. Again, I need more details, but we know it's an all-in-one. And we know you've got the macroalgae jammed in the back. It could be a lack of space. It could be a lack of nutrients. There's just not enough stuff in there to give the plants a chance to grow. Or it could just be you're deficient in iron, because iron is very important to help macroalgae grow. In my refugium, I was cleaning the glass last night, and I didn't touch the substrate that I'm going to be cleaning tonight. But I was looking at the macro, and it's kind of thin. And on my last ICP test, it said non-detected for iron. So I need to start dosing iron to my tank to bring that number up. And then, of course, my macroalgae will do much better, as well as the turf algae and my algae turf scrubber. And he also said I use sea lettuce, chaetomorpha, and dragon's breath. Well, dragon's breath you could actually put in the display area and see how it does for you. It might actually do well in there versus putting it in the back. Most people don't use dragon's breath as a nutrient removal. They do it because it's pretty. And I have some flame algae inside Caitlin's tank back there, and it's okay. It's not doing great. It doesn't help that it pulls itself off the rock and ends up in the pump getting a small haircut. But hopefully, now that I've replanted it again, what I did this time, I grabbed that 2-part putty, and I mixed it up, and then I took a dental tool and I put a dent in there, and then I put a drop of glue in there, and then I pushed the macro into the glue, and then I squeezed the putty, and I took the putty and jammed it on the rock. So hopefully now those 2 pieces of flame algae will stay and grow and be really pretty, because I wanted that look for that tank. So we'll see. But I just did it a couple days ago. But if macroalgae grows in the main display, then it's just something's not right with what's happening all-in-one in the back. Maybe the light's too intense for it and it's just baking it. Maybe you could reduce the light cycle. Instead of 7 or 9 hours, you might try 4 hours and see how it does. I mean, these are the little tweaks we do to find what works perfectly. It could just be the area's too small for this and it's just not really a usable option. Another choice might be to put some kind of a basket in the back of the tank in the main display up in the top corner and put the macroalgae in there and just see how it does under the normal light. Plus, you can control it in that basket, and so it won't spread into your reef itself. I don't know how to say this name, but thank you very much for the super chat. They said, do you see your reef and fish as pets or as decoration? I'm curious about the mindset of a reefer. I'm getting my own tank. For me, they're pets. I tell people I prefer my pets underwater. So the corals and the fish, they're all my pets. And the invertebrates, an invertebrate is actually a little bit easier to consider as a pet versus a coral. I mean, the corals, they are all little tiny mouths that have to be fed. So it does fit under the pet description, right? And I'm caring for it. So it's not a garden, it's not a plant, it's an animal, and I have to feed it. But fish, I like to name them. Invertebrates like shrimp and cucumbers, and I'm trying to think what else. Arrow crabs and hermit crabs and the sea hares that eat algae, the giant tiger cowrie that's the size of a lemon that just bulldozed over all my corals and knocked them into the anemone. The anemones and all the tentacles, all the clownfish swimming in and out of it, those are all my pets. And I love them, and I try to keep them alive forever. And some things live much longer than others. I recently lost an Anthias. I don't have any idea why. I just found it dead on the bottom of the tank. I don't know what happened. And I took a picture of it. And then the next day I took another picture of it because all the color was gone. But I didn't reach in to remove it. And then the next thing I know, it was gone. I mean, no trace of it existed. I don't know where it went to. I don't know how it got blown to a different part of the tank, or if something grabbed it and carried it away, if a starfish, took it, if worms pulled it apart. I have no idea, but that beautiful Anthias is gone. And I'd had it for many years, 5-6 years. And I definitely thought of it as a wet pet. Alfredo says, are you doing anything specific with your light to grow the Halimeda? Or are they just the same settings as your coral tank? The Halimeda, or the money plant, is in the little tiny tank right there. And I'm trying to point to the right spot. See, I'm pointing that way, but it looks like I'm pointing at the tank. And it's really small. It's barely growing. It's lacking something. I'll do some water tests today and see what's going on with my water parameters. I do believe that's a coral that likes calcium. So I need to see, maybe it likes more intense light than what the AI prime can put out. I don't know. But there's some in there. It's hanging in there. But in my refugium, I'm growing feather caulerpa. And that light is about this far off the water. And it's situated in a way where if the sump filled to the top, that light is actually hanging a little bit too low. It needs to be up another ½ inch to be safe, to stay completely dry. Now, my sump never fills to the top, but when you say it's fine, that's when things go wrong. So I do need to take the time to adjust the length of the hanging apparatus to get that light up a ½ inch higher. But I keep it close to the plants, and they get light for about 9 hours a day, and that seems to work really, really well. I do like white lighting for macroalgae rather than pink. And so I use the Reef Bright plant light, and I think it's plant, like plant, and then LYTE is what they call it. And it's 2 different colors. It's like a 5100 Kelvin LED and a 6500 Kelvin LED. And if you look at the reflection, because you can't look at the light and see it very well, it burns your eyeballs out. But if you look at the light reflecting off the water, you can see every other chip as a different color. So it's 5100 Kelvin, 6500, 51, 65, 51, 65, all the way across the full strip, 4 feet across. And that that light works really, really well. And then the Luma light came out, which is a cheaper version of the XHO. And that's the exact same mixture of the two. And it grew feather caulerpa beautifully in the refugium under my frag tank too. So that's about all I can tell you in the answer to your question. The Lone Aquarius says, is your saltwater vat constantly full of mixed saltwater? Well, yes and no. It's filled to the top, and then I deplete it. And originally, my thought was, because it makes 250 gallons, my thought was have 200 gallons or more ready at all times, no matter what. But the reality of it is, like right now, I just used well over 100 for the 2 water changes. And so I have somewhere around 120 gallons of water left in the vat, and I plan to do an 80-gallon tonight. So that'll knock it down to where I have like 40 gallons left, which is enough to do 1 more water change or 2 on Caitlin's tank over the next week or 2. But I'm going to just refill the container with more RO water, and then I'm going to use my water chemistry calculator to determine how much salt I need to do to get the salinity back up to 35 ppt again, and I'll add that amount of salt, which in the last one I mixed up, I needed 87 pounds of salt. So it's a lot of salt, and it's a lot of hauling it up and down the ladder. But that's how I do it. And so I'm not trying to keep it full to the top all the time because unfortunately the big problem is, number one, like I said earlier in this video, is that the water isn't clear, and I want it to be clear. If I had to use 200 gallons all of a sudden into my tank would be kind of opaque and cloudy and hideous, and it bothers me. So I'd much rather have clear water if I had 200 gallons And it might require me to use a different salt mix, but I'm using this, so I'm just going to keep using it. But I have some salt water available. And having at least 50, 100, 150 available at any time is pretty good. But having it maxed out, no, I don't shoot to have it maxed out at all times. And I think even a lot of people that are doing automatic water changes, they may fill up a barrel completely, and then they're doing automatic water changes, and it drops an inch or 2 inches a day. And then after whatever it is, a week or two, they have to refill the container. So again, they had a lot at one point, but they got dissipated or used up, and they had to refill it. Michael says, and this happened to me too. He said, my magnesium is always high. The calcium and the alkalinity are stable, and I dose those regularly. But no matter what, though, my magnesium always at between 1,500 and 1,600, and yet the corals are happy. So when I use the Sibon salt, the stuff that came from China, every bag was 1,500 ppm. And I started the tank with that salt water. So my Reef started with 1,500, and every water change was 1,500, and it never came down in 3 years. I didn't dose 1 drop of magnesium at all, and my Reef continued to just grow and thrive and looked great. Now, there has been this weird thing I've come across where more and more people are shooting for 1,500 intentionally, and I don't know who started that idea, but that is too high. Now, in your situation, it won't come down and your Reef is doing well, so good. It adapted, it's fine. But I wouldn't intentionally shoot for that number. I've been told that in the ocean, the average magnesium level is 1280. And so most people shot for 1,300. I have found that 1,400 works best for all my tanks and for all my corals, and especially for anything that's a Pora. They love magnesium and they get their color from it. And when you're low on magnesium, your Montes get really pale. So getting the magnesium back up where it belongs helps. But I would aim for 1,400 with anyone else. With you, since you can't get it to come down, and you can check your next batch of salt water and you can see what the mix is, and you could try a different brand of salt that has a lower magnesium level if you're trying to bring it down. But if everything's working and it's just a high number, then it just is what it is. But do realize after 1,600, snails their foot starts to atrophy and they can't walk. They just get frozen in one spot on your tank, and they'll be there a long time until they finally die because they're not eating because they can't move because they're frozen. So it really would be best to keep magnesium at a more reasonable number between 13 and 1,400. Becca Bits says, do you think the high nitrate could have been caused by the sharp increase in coral growth once you corrected deficiencies and started dosing trace elements? You know, I was wondering if dosing trace elements could somehow cause nitrate to rise. And everyone I spoke with, all the smarter people, they said no. Now, one person did throw out a theory that I had a certain type of bacteria that was doing really well at maintaining my nitrate. But when I added the trace elements, that it strengthened a different bacteria, a different strain of bacteria in my tank that overpowered my nitrate reducing bacteria and possibly wiped them out or reduced their numbers to the point where my nitrate has just grown out of control. And that one kind of made sense to me. I was like, huh, interesting. I mean, the only way to know at this point would be to do a microbiome test and find out what strains of bacteria my tank has. And I haven't done it. I should have done it 3 weeks ago. I should have done it a month ago. But I haven't done it. I have to go look up who I need to order it from and do the test. And then I need to find out what I can put in my tank to replace whatever bacteria is lacking. But in the meantime, I know water changes bring the nitrate down manually. And then if I were to use like the nitrate reducing resin to kind of keep it down, that would help as well. So there's that. Sanjay's method of nitrate control is dosing vodka. And that's another method that I could turn on to a dosing pump and just let that happen. The problem with dosing vodka or any kind of carbon is you could end up with cyanobacteria in your tank, and I don't really want cyanobacteria. But I don't think trace elements cause nitrate to rise, even though I was kind of blaming them. I was like, well, that's the only thing I put in my tank every day for the last month. And it just kept going up and up and up. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate that. He says he likes the view. I thought I'd try something different. I am using, City Coder says, what salt are you using for your tanks? I'm using Aquavitro Salinity. It's from the parent company, Seachem. And I've been using that salt since 2015. Just Another Reefer says, I just like to know how the anemone cube is coming along since the tank change. Hasn't happened yet. It's still pending. I have to build the stand. I've been working on finishing up the last of what needs to happen in the studio. I just put up some nice shelves yesterday to get some things off the floor and out of my way. I got to keep putting things, I got to make it where I can work in that building easily. And once that's accomplished, I can then turn my attention to building a new stand and canopy for the 60-gallon glass, the glass aquarium that's made from Planet Aquariums. And once I get that set up and plumbed into the system, I'll start cycling it. And my thought is going to be just put in 1 or 2 bags of sand in there and let water circulate through the entire setup behind me. And then after, a duration, I can then move livestock into it and just take down the temporary tank and remove it. It's been running much too long, and I cannot believe I let this happen. My initial thought was that temporary tank will be up for a few weeks. It's been up for like 5 or 6 months. It's crazy. But, every night I feed all those clownfish, and those anemones just fill up that tank completely, and it's totally in my way. So hopefully I'll have something nice to show you guys. And maybe when I'm working on that, I'll kind of do some more reef diaries to where you can kind of see how that's being built and release that to you guys. Let's see. Will says, I'm on your website as I listen. Those shirts are pretty funny. Yeah, there's a bunch of good ones from I'm a Reefer, and they're going to be adding some more soon. And when they add them, I'll be adding them to the website. And they've got some really cool choices coming up that when I have more information, I'll let you know. GP said that he was using the siphon to do a water change, and it was busy sucking out the water as he's putting new water in, and it was about 5 minutes later he realized it was pulling out the new water as well. So yep, that's the problem, trying to automate all this stuff to where you can keep track of all the spinning plates and make sure that you're only putting in good, not wasting any of the good water. It happens. Just Another Reefer says, been using your algae removal method and have finally won the battle. I've been doing this whilst doing concentrated water changes through really wet skimming and just replacing with new salt water. Yeah, that could work. And then I have an algae reactor, but it always fails with Chaetomorpha, but always ends up growing hair algae, which I then remove. Would you say this is a safe way to remove nutrients or a risk of spreading? Well, if the algae is just growing in there, it's kind of contained. So, could some get out and get back into the system? Yes. You could put a filter sock on the effluent, so that way anything that sneaks out of that reactor would be trapped. And if you used like a mesh filter sock rather than a felt one, they last forever, and they don't clog up. There's, like I said, they go for months without having to attend to them, and then you can just take it apart, rinse it out, and kind of rub it between your hands and get it cleanish. You can even soak it in bleach water if you wanted to make it look new again, and then put it back in the system after it's been completely rinsed really clean. And that can catch any hair algae. I have such a mesh filter sock under my algae turf scrubber, and yeah, all kinds of stuff grows and falls into there, and just I have to remove it from time to time and clean it out, but it keeps it from getting into my whole system. Larry says, I remember oceanic salt mix, very dirty. It was really dirty stuff. Perplexed has a great question. If I leave the inlet feed going into my RODI unit on and shut off the DI going out and the RO out, is it still coming? Is it still coming out of the black waste while it's being left on? Okay, so in theory, it should be off. If you turn on the cold water line to your RODI system, you're pressurizing the unit, and then you open a valve, whether it's RO or you open another valve that's DI, or you don't have that middle valve. You just have one on the DI. Usually when you close it, what'll happen is the system will fully pressurize up again, and then there's this white thing behind the membrane housing that's got 4 tubes stuck into it. That's called the auto shutoff valve, and there's a piston in there. And the water pressure pushes the piston forward that stops any more water from getting in, and it should turn off. And if it's doing its job and it turns off, the system will be silent. And you could then take the black hose out of the drain, and you could see nothing's coming out. If you hear it hissing, water's still going down the drain the entire time. Now, those auto shutoff valves don't last forever. And after a couple of years, you might have to buy a new one, but they're like $10 or $11. They're not crazy expensive. And so you can just put a new one on there, and it can operate like it's supposed to. But in general, it's best to let the system pressurize and turn itself off, and you don't have to keep turning off the cold water source at all. Mine's always on. And I did a couple of things to modify mine to make it a little bit easier. I have a whole video about how to get the most out of your RODI system on this channel. So if you haven't watched it yet, check it out. It's a pretty old video, but it's everything in there is still accurate. But what I did was the cold water line that comes from the cold water tap goes up to my RODI system. I put a cutoff valve right there. So I can close it right there to easily change the filters when I need to, rather than having to pull the dryer away from the wall, get to that valve back there and close it off. I just let that be my quick on-off. But I only close that valve when I'm going out of town and when I'm changing the filters. And the rest of the time, it's always open, and it's full pressure of the system, and it's off, and there's no water being wasted down the waistline. Winterwater says, what pump do you recommend for continuous dosing? I like the Versa pump, even though they're hard to come by, but that's what I use to continually feed water into my calcium reactor. Chemour also has some pumps that are continuous duty. They have one that is made for calcium reactors that you could use, and that's the only two that come to my mind right now. Rev Devil says, my corals are unhappy, but no amount of water changes are helping. My ICP tests are all in range, and the rest of the parameters are in check. What could be going on? What kind of corals are they? Maybe we can identify that. If all the water parameters are perfect, and yet the corals are wilted or closed up or faded, you're probably looking at a contaminant, which could be from a split magnet, for example. It could be the lighting is on too long, or it's too intense to where the corals are just being baked alive, so to speak. We need to figure out what's happening. And have you also looked at the corals late at night, just for comparison? Just, you grab a flashlight and just see if they look normal when it's dark. Because maybe it's just your light cycle's too long, or maybe there's something in the water that's really bad. I'm surprised, though, that you wouldn't see anything show up in the ICP test, though. Because usually there's something that's not right. Sinstrak, I think that's how you say that, said, I'm doing a 20% water change on a 230-gallon tank once a month. This results in brown algae and diatoms. Nitrates and phosphates are 3.4 and 0. Should I stop doing water changes? You can definitely do less of a water change, and you probably need to start dosing some nitrate and phosphate to your tank to kind of get the numbers up a little bit. And that would help with the diatom situation that you're seeing. Also, having some kind of critters to stir the sand bed would be good. Maybe some, hey, that makes me remember, I should put some Nacerius snails in that tank, because they'll help stir the sand and not do any damage. But having something that can clean your sand on a regular basis, hermit crabs, Nacerius snails, cucumbers, they all will help to kind of consume the diatoms, which would then be beneficial. You also may be dealing with something that's not diatoms. It could be traces of dinoflagellates because your nitrate and phosphate are just so darn low. I've noticed more and more people are saying they're happy with nitrates being under 20, and yours is 3.4. So getting nitrate up a little bit higher would be good, and getting phosphate up from 0 would be really important also. I'd bring that up to somewhere around between 0.03 and 0.1. So if you get those up, that should help. And yeah, so you could reduce the water changes some. I mean, you're only doing 20% once a month, but we definitely don't want that to get away from you. I think you might be able to just continue your water change system, but you need to dose some nitrate and phosphate. And I sell Neo Nitro and Neo Phos from my website if you need some. And I sell that in the 500 milliliter bottles, so that would be a good savings for you. Dusk says this is a good camera angle. I wish I had filmed me setting up this room today because I tried lots of different things until I was like, okay, I kind of like this one. Let's see. Daniel says, first time using F-Aptasia, and I have an Aptasia growing between the base of an Acan lordoensis and the plug that it's on. Can the product be used against the base without killing the Acan? I would say no. So what I would do, I would probably take the Acan off the plug and then hold the Acan in my hand and take a dental tool, and I would scrape off every little bit of the Aptasia skin till there's nothing. You know, make sure there's no tissue left, scrape it all away. And then you could re-glue it onto the frag plug, onto a new frag plug if you want, and put it back in your Reef, or maybe just put the Acan directly onto the rockwork with some glue, and that way you've kind of eliminated it. But the F-Aptasia will definitely burn or kill some of the Acan as well, and those are too nice to risk, so I wouldn't do it. Sometimes you just have to manually go in there and scrape it away, you know, like someone that's brushing, you know, they are unearthing fossils, and they get their brushes and their tools, and they're trying not to damage the bone as they're getting rid of all the mud and the dirt. Same principle. And by the way, speaking of Aptasia, I discovered one new one in Kate's tank on the far left side under that red Valonia looking stuff, and I'm going to nuke it because I had 3 in there and I killed all 3, and they were on the other side of the tank. So this is one that's new that probably was really small and under the rock and has emerged, and it's going to go away because I'm not going to let them take over that tank and cause chaos. Razor says, should I add salt every time I do a water change? Yes. You're changing water with salt water. So if you're just putting in fresh water, you're topping off. But if you're sucking water out of the tank and putting new water in, you're taking out salt water, you're putting in salt water. So yes, you would always mix up your salt water. Sean says, loving this casual, cozy setup you have. You know, I wish it was more comfortable. I need the monitor to be closer. It's a little hard to read what you guys are saying. But I'll relax after the show is over. How are we doing on time? We've been talking about an hour and 40 minutes. Mina asks, I cleaned my sump yesterday. I vacuum or shop vacked out all the detritus. Should I watch for anything, or should I add any more copepods? You don't have to do anything. You did your job. You cleaned the sump. That's it. There's nothing to fret, nothing to worry about. All you do is remove decay. It's done. Julian says, how long can you keep your salt mix? Is there a shelf life? The salt itself, you want to keep in a sealed container, or you want to seal the bag. There's lots of different ways of doing it. I've done a few different methods over the years. When I use bagged salt, I would, press out the air and fold it over, and I'd use packing tape to tape it together so that no air could get in and turn it solid. If salt itself turns into a brick, I don't want to use it because usually it will not fully dissolve. And typically anything that doesn't fully dissolve doesn't work well in our tanks. And if you were to break it up with a hammer, because you're like, I'm not going to waste it, this costs me money. Usually, even the small bits, as they somehow get into your tank one way or another, they sting corals and burn them. So we want to keep all our stuff nice and sealed. My big barrel of salt that I get, it's 300 pounds of salt. There's a metal ring, and I take off the lid, and then there's a bag, and I open the bag, and there's another bag inside that, and I open that, and I scoop out my salt, and then I push all the air out, and I close the bag again, and then I take the next bag, and I push the air out, and I close that bag again, and I put the lid back on and snap the ring, and it's closed for the next, whatever it is, month or two, until I need to make salt again, and that way it stays nice and pure. Salt mix should last indefinitely as long as it doesn't get exposed to too much air. Salt water is usually good for about a month in a sealed container, and after that, probably should not be used. If you have salt water circulating, you can use it for months. But usually salt water has been circulating for months in a container, you're going to see something dissipate, and most likely alkalinity/pH will drop, and you need to buffer that up to bring those numbers back up to the right amount that match your reef, and then it's safe to use. Winterwater says, how often do you dose CF? CF? I don't know. All the time? Never. What's CF? What am I? Can't think of what it stands for, and I'm usually good at acronyms. Oh, Mike was talking about a CO2 scrubber and wants to convert it into a carbon reactor. Yeah, I mean, you could do that because all that is, as far as I know, is an RO housing with some tubing on it. And so if you were no longer using it as a CO2 scrubber, you could then probably put some kind of a tube down to the bottom if it doesn't already come with one, and you could put carbon inside there. I mean, to be honest, I've never really liked using the RO tubing for that type of application. I always thought it was kind of weird. And I mean, I sell RO systems, and I don't even offer that. So I would just use like a Too Little Fishy phosphate reactor. The smaller one can either sit in your sump or hang on your tank, and you can run carbon that way, which is a really nice way to clarify the water. And it's a half a cup of granulated activated carbon or pelletized carbon, a half a cup per 50 gallons for your system. And it's good for a few days. Hello, Matthew. Digital Soundscape says, how much white light do your lights use? And would you recommend using more blue than white? So right now my tank is in photo mode. Where's my phone? I'll change some colors for you. It won't look good because it's so far away from the camera, but I'll show you some different looks. So this is what my reef would normally look like right now. Didn't look like it changed at all. So let's try doing my streaming look. So that is the look of the reef when I do my live stream normally. And if we were a little closer, it wouldn't look blown out and it would look pretty good. But in person, it kind of looks dim. And that's basically a lot of white light. And then if I want crazy blue mode, I have a setting here called Make It Glow. And it looks like that. And it looks like Papa Smurf just peed in my tank. So, and then if I just want to run all my lights at 100%, that's what the tank looks like. From this distance, you can't appreciate it. In person, it looks really, really good at 100%. But invariably, I have some white light. And then in the early morning hours, let me rephrase that. My first light comes on at 11:30 in the morning, okay? That's the early morning of the reef. It is in the deep blue color. And then it heads off into the whites for the afternoon. And then as it goes into the evening, it gets back into the blue mode. So it's really pretty late at night for me. But I think I'll put it in streaming mode for now because that looks a little bit better. I like white light. I've always liked white light. I've actually encouraged people to run 10K lighting for at least an hour and a half, 2 hours a day. And they could do it when they're not home, for example, if they hate the look. Because the one thing about 10K lighting is you see everything wrong with your tank. Because the blue hides everything. The blue hides cyanobacteria. Matter of fact, people are like, well, what is this stuff? It's black. I'm like, no, it's not. Get some white light on there. Like, oh, it's red. Right, exactly. Because the blue masks everything. So running your tank with white light, number one, you see the flaws, you can find them things you need to correct, and you can fix them. And number two, the white light is your corals benefit from it. The fish don't care. They really don't. They don't care at all. And then, but the blue lighting makes things glow and look so expensive and pretty. And so I understand having a period of the day, or really in the evening. I think the evening's a great time to have more of a blue hue. And Dwayne sent me his profile. He calls it evening mode. And it's the color of his reef when he watches TV. And so I've got that as another option. I turn it on occasionally, but I already have my schedule set, and I'm very happy with it. I actually go through about 5 or 6 different iterations of different spectrums from the morning to the night. And a couple of them are actually, as is, right out of the light fixture. And most of them are custom settings where I just adjust them to what I like. And if you happen to be an Apex user, you can actually go into the sky and you can look up the schemes and you can find Milev's Reef and you can actually try mine out. And quite a few people apparently use mine and like it. And maybe they tweaked it some to make it even better. I don't even know. But they're like, oh, I like what you've picked. And I was like, oh, that's nice. So that's the nice thing. We can share our colors or our schedules, and people can try them out and try out someone else's rather than just inserting AB+, which is a very popular one that people have been using since Ecotech came out with that years ago. Wagon says, I need help. I have a reef tank I started 5 months ago. Magnesium is really low. And alkaline and nitrite says it's high. Nitrite? I do water changes every Sunday, and the reef tank is 75 gallons. Okay, so number one, I'm glad you're testing. Fantastic. I don't know why you have any nitrite at all in your tank. Your tank should be done cycling at 5 months old. Maybe you meant nitrate and it's just a typo. Sometimes our stuff auto-corrects when we're typing. I literally could not type in 3 letters yesterday. I was trying to type in ABS, which is a type of plastic that bulkheads are made out of. And every single time I typed ABS, it changed it to A and D. And I tried 20 times. I tried all capitals, I tried lowercase letters, and it kept changing ABS to A and D. I gave up. I put A period, B period, S period, which I know looked weird, but I had to say ABS. So anyway, nitrite should not be up. You should be measuring 0. Your tank should be fully cycled when you have livestock in there. Now, you said your magnesium is low, and you can add magnesium. I sell 2 different brands. One that's from Frank's Tanks. It's a magnesium mix that you mix up with RO water and you dose it in the tank. You can dose it manually every day. You just put in a certain amount and you pour it into an area of high flow and it just trickles in and mixes. And when I say trickle it in, I mean, you literally are like, here's your power head and water shooting across the tank and you've got your little vial or you've got a syringe or whatever you're using to measure with. And you put it in over 30 to 45 seconds, very, very slowly until all of it is in for that day. And then you do the same thing the next day and the same thing the day after that. And you keep doing it every single day until your magnesium is the right level, and then you stop. It takes a lot of magnesium to bring magnesium up, just so you know, so don't be shocked. Don't fear it. It's not going to kill your tank by putting it in. Generally speaking, you want to put in the right amount to bring up your number, but you don't want to increase it more than 100 ppm per day. So you could take, like let's say you mixed up a batch that's a gallon, or you mixed up 2 liters or something, and you put that in. You could put in that entire 2 liters worth over a period of 2 weeks until you've used it all up, and by then your magnesium should be where it needs to be, if it needed that much. I'm just totally grabbing numbers out of the air here. So if your tank needs 1 liter of magnesium to bring it to the right level, you can put in 1 liter, you can put in 100 milliliters a day for 10 days. And then hopefully after 10 days, your magnesium is exactly where you want it to be. That would be the perfect scenario. And then usually once it's up, it stays up. That's the nice thing. It's not something you have to keep dosing for the rest of your life. Typically, you put it in, it's good for a while, then it starts to dissipate and you add a little bit more. The other one that I use is called Magnesium Pronto, and I've been using that one for years. I love it. It's in a jar about this tall. It's kind of heavy, and it can make almost 5 gallons of, or it definitely makes 4 gallons of magnesium, and it's very affordable. And I have the recipe of what you need, which is 1 tablespoon of Magnesium Pronto to 10 ounces of water. So I mix up 120 ounces, which is not a gallon. And I put in 10 scoops of Magnesium Pronto. I stir that up. And then I have a dosing pump that puts in a specific amount every single day until the jug is empty. And then once it's empty, then I make a new batch and I set it up under the tank and I let it dose it again. So that's the magnesium one. Now you said alkalinity, it says it's high. I don't know what high means. If you're using test strips, you need to use a test kit. It would be good to know some real numbers. And usually we like to measure our alkalinity in DKH. So if you were measuring it and your test kit came back 6.5, 7, 7.5, that's kind of too low. Usually we want to get somewhere between 8 and 11. So pick a number in the middle of that zone. Like right now my tank is like 8.9. And so I want to stay close to 8.9 all the time. I mean, that's my goal. And you might say, well, I love it when it's 8.1. Or you might say, I love it at 10.5. As long as you can just keep it at 10.5 day after day, week after week, month after month, fantastic. Corals love really stable alkalinity, and so we want to maintain it. And so we dose to get that number where it needs to be. But you said it's high, so you probably don't have to dose any, but we really need to find out what high means. So we're going to have to find out some real numbers. You may have to get some other kind of a test kit. I like ELOS for measuring alkalinity. It's super easy. Tropic Marin makes a super easy test kit as well. Saliford's super easy. The Hanna Checker for alkalinity is super easy. It's one of the easiest tests. Alkalinity and phosphate are the 2 test kits I love doing. Everything else is work. Matthew says, the studio looks great. Or looks like it's a great place to work. Is it working out the way you thought it would? Yes. I love that I can go in there. It's climate controlled. It's always 75 degrees. Fantastic. And like right now, it is 93 degrees. Yesterday it was 97 outside. I just walk in there and it's comfortable. I've got the TV on. I'm binging Better Call Saul very slowly, like 1 episode a day. And I can go out there and I can build things. I can pack orders. I'm stamping my boxes with a rubber stamp. I've got to build another workstation. I've got to go get some carpet to put on top. I need to paint the workstations so they all match. And still got to find me some lights for the ceiling. I have not found anything that I love yet that will work in my situation, and I might just have to cave in and take something I don't like just to get it done. But I really did have a different thought process for the lights on the ceiling that I wanted to go with. So I'm a little disappointed that it didn't work out. But it all comes down to how it's wired, and I may not be able to get what I wanted. But as long as I have good lighting there, it'll be ideal. And I love that I've been able to take so much out of the house and put it out there to empty this house out. And it's going to allow me to finish what needs to be done in the house next, which will be to finish painting the walls and to replace the carpet, which that's going to be a big ordeal because everything I own is on carpet. So I have to remove everything. And I'm just picturing my entire back lawn covered with everything I own. And then I'll only bring in the stuff I like, and everything else on the lawn out there, I will then decide how to dispose of to declutter my life a little bit. But no, it's great. I love it. It's I've had no situations. The electricity is working perfectly. The internet's working perfectly out there. The alarm system's working perfectly. I'm very happy with the whole setup. And I'm looking forward to doing lots of work out there. The matching love seat that goes with this leather chair, it's going to eventually be out there. So that way when Jack is out there with me, she will be able to just lie down and relax. If I need to plunk down and rest my back for a few minutes, I'll have a nice, soft, comfortable chair. And that'll be replacing the living room with some new furniture that I've had this stuff for over a decade. And it's time for something nicer, that's bigger. This room was small. I mean, I had my office nook that I'm facing the office nook right now. Take a picture of you guys. Let's see. I'll stick this up on Instagram right now so you can see what this looks like. Let me do this. So, do this. I'm trying to darken it down a little bit because the lights that are shining on me are really bright. All right. So I'll send this to Instagram so you guys can check out and see where you are. But this office area that's sitting right here is going to go away. I don't know where it's going to go. It doesn't fit out there, but it's got to go away. And then I want to put like an L-shaped sectional sofa that's huge because me and Jack on the love seat doesn't work. I should do these things at the beginning. Live streaming on YouTube. People are going to see this and they're going to come over here to YouTube and they're going to say, but the show just ended. All right, that's posted. Let's see, next question. Alex says, my phosphates have bottomed out to near zero. Should I turn off my Refugium light and turn off the skimmer? I wouldn't. I would dose some phosphate and just bring the number up. You can just buy a bottle of it and just put in what you need to get the number where it needs to be. You can skim less if you want to, but with the skimmer turned off, it is no longer driving off the CO2. And with the CO2 buildup in your tank, the pH will drop. And when the pH drops, the livestock isn't as happy. So we want to make sure everything's right. Now, I know you've been working with your tank for some time, and I feel like you tinker with it a lot. And I would like to see you become a little bit more hands-off with the aquarium to some degree. I'm not sure why your phosphates are bottoming out, but it could be just new tank syndrome because it's not super old. And if you did set it up with dry rock and dry sand, it's kind of a normal thing that happens to a lot of people. But I think you could dose some phosphate. You could reduce the skimmers. You could lower the water level in the skimmer so it's not pulling out as much skimmate, skim drier. And that would help keep some DOX in the system, which is dissolved organic compounds, which would help maintain some more organics. You can also run the Refugium light 4 hours a day instead of 7 or 9 hours a day. And so you can kind of make some small changes, but you may need to actually physically dose some neonitro for a little bit. Michael says, when you get in the Achilles tang, I need to call that store and see if they still have it. I was kind of not wanting to spend $450 right now. That's part of it. But it definitely is on my wish list. So I'd like to do that. I get a lot of emails because of the company I run. And I just got this email from some distributor, I guess I'd say, or wholesaler. Maybe it's a wholesaler out of, I think it was Indonesia. And they just showed a tank with like 50 powder blue tangs. And then they had 100 of this and 100 of that. I'm like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to just order yourself a buttload of powder blue tanks? But I mean, that's what they do. They sell to stores all over the world, so somehow I got on their list. I'm always like, delete, spam, don't care, don't do it. But it is kind of neat to see them in huge groups. Bob says, do you know if the Nero 3 will be back in stock anytime soon, anywhere? I have no idea. I haven't followed up on that at all, but I will try to find out because I'm about to place some orders for some more equipment for the shop and, to sell. And so I'll see what's in stock or what I can learn, and maybe I'll have an answer for you. Oh, speaking of things that are new, so Reborn is a calcium reactor media that a lot of us use. And then after a while, we couldn't get any. And then finally, Two Little Fishies started coming out with new Reborn, and the stuff was smaller. And some people complained, like, oh, I liked it because it was bigger pieces. And now it's smaller. I don't like smaller. And to be honest, I don't care. I mean, yeah, bigger was cool looking, and that's what's in my Refugium. So I'm happy I own it. But I've been using the smaller, and it still works. It still dissolves into alkaline and calcium, and my corals keep growing. So anyway, while I was at Magna, standing in Julian's booth as he was breaking it down on Sunday evening, there was this huge box of Reborn media, and the bag was open so you could see the media. And I was looking at it, and I was thinking, that stuff looks bigger. But I didn't say anything. And I said to Julian, I said, is this that like 40-pound box or something? Because normally you buy them by the kilo in these bags. And it's like the super box that some people like to buy. And like Dwayne likes to buy it in bulk. He likes to get this huge box. And he says, yeah, that's such and such. And he says, and by the way, it's the nice size everyone likes again. So if you turned away from reborn media for a while and you're wanting to get back into it, it will become available in larger nugget size soon. So you can look forward to that. I just refilled my calcium reactor last night. I really need to take the entire reactor out and clean it completely because it's been running for a long time without the attention. And my alkaline's been dropping. And so I was buffering daily to bring it back up. And my friend said, why don't you just fill it up with media? I said, well, the bottom's kind of sludgy. I want to clean it, but I can't get it out because the temporary anemone cube tank is in my way. And he said, just top it off, just so your tank is okay. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So while I was doing my water change, I went ahead and I pulled off the lid with those easy, quick releases that I love so much from Slide Lock. And I removed the lid. I took out the screen and I dumped in half a bag or whatever that is, 2 kilos of reborn media, put the lid back on, and my alkaline immediately shot up a little bit higher because there's more media in the reactor. And so I have a code in my Apex that actually limits the calcium reactor when it starts to rise too high so that my alkaline will not get out of control. And the limiter is turned on right now. It's kind of neat. So every 6 hours it checks. If the limiter needs to be on, it's on, and it controls how much CO2 is being pushed into the reactor to melt the media. Anyway, for those of you that don't use the calcium reactor media, I'm sure that went right over your head, but it is a very practical thing that makes my life a lot easier. And I'm very glad that I'm not mixing up 5 gallons of alkalinity and 5 gallons of calcium and 5 gallons of magnesium every month and setting up massive dosing pumps that I have to babysit all the time. Ruben says, I bought a filefish yesterday to eradicate small aptasia. How long would it take for it to take fancy for the aptasia? To actually like the aptasia? It could be pretty quick. It might just decide to start going after them, or it may not. Or it may do good for a while, and then it may choose to start eating the foods you put in the tank and not be as helpful as you'd like it to be. All these things happen because there's no guarantee when you put something in that it will be the Terminator that you think it'll be. But there are other techniques as well. But hopefully your filefish will start doing its job and start nipping away at them. Hussein says, is it detrimental to not change water in a Red Sea Reef or Nano for a month? No. And it really comes down to the livestock. You know, what's in the tank? What are its demands? If you have finicky corals, they may need water changes, where you might have a bunch of softies like mushrooms and zoanthids and rickordia and leathers, and those don't care. I mean, they could go a long time between water changes without having any kind of ill effect. But at some point, there is a tipping point. There's too much toxicity in the system from chemical warfare between corals, and so doing a water change or running carbon is a good way to remove some of those toxins so that everything can be healthy and happy and thrive. Oh, you can see that? Yep, the Interruptus angelfish swims all over the place and likes to go up and down to the top, which is kind of funny. I'm not sure what she sees unless she sees her own reflection, but she does that a lot. But she also goes in and out of all the rock work. I can see the firefish as well. And then you can see Spock, my little whale, behind me over my shoulder. Johnny says, do you find the Versa tubing does not last as long as it should? I run mine at 70 milliliters per minute on my calcium reactor. It needs calibrating every couple of weeks, but then it needs replacing every 6 weeks. Yes. I'm running almost the same number you are. I think I'm running 60 to 70 milliliters a minute as well. I don't have to calibrate it as much as you do, but I do notice that my tubing has to be replaced about every 8 to 10 weeks, and it's super annoying, and I really hate that. And I feel like that piece of tubing should be way more durable. And I don't know why we don't have something that works better. I feel like something must exist on the market. Now, Parker's Reef did a video on his YouTube channel where he found the exact same tubing and he bought it. And it's like a 5-foot or 10-foot piece or 50, whatever you got, like 5 meters or something. And he will then take the time to rebuild like 5 of those horseshoe-shaped things. And then he's good for the rest of the year. And I have not done that yet, but I am starting to collect the used ones because I think I will do that. It'll save me money to rebuild them, but it kind of sucks you have to do that. I just feel like that tubing going over the roller should be something more durable and long-lasting. And it's not just the fact that it wears out. I was talking to one person who says his actually cracks and loses a siphon. So that's why he has to replace his. And I feel like the cost of that pump is very expensive, and I feel like that component should be better quality and should last longer. I don't know what that should be. I feel like that should be Ecotech's job to find and replace, and not expect us end users to pay this much money to replace that piece on a regular basis. And Ruben, I answered that earlier. The tank is still on hold. I haven't set it up yet. It's my fault. Tim says, what fish do you think you'll get next? Are you're planning to get next? Do you have one in mind? Oh, and one of my favorites is the crosshatch trigger. Never kept a triggerfish. Don't know that I want one. I think I would like to put in a swarm of anthias. I think that'd be really cool. And I'm leaning toward just getting a bunch of lyre tails. Hussein says, the temperature of my water mixing station is 86 degrees. After adding it to the tank, the temperature increases by 1 degree only. Can this cause problems? No, because it's only 1 degree, but ideally, think about it. As you're pumping in 86 degree water into your tank, well, okay, let me ask you this. Is your tank 85 at all times and you're just going to 86? What you want is your barrel to match the same as your tank. One method that some people do, like if their water mix station is in the garage, it gets really warm, they actually put a chiller on there and they chill it down to the right temperature so it's ready for the water change. And in a way, that's kind of convenient because you could have it chill during the summer and add heat during the winter and literally have it at the exact same number as your tank. So you could look at the gauge, say it's 77, and you measure your tank, 77, okay, I can do my water change. And you could literally dial in the chiller/heater to the exact temperature your tank always is on the regular. And that way, anytime you have to do a water change, they match. That would be perfect. But I wouldn't want to pump. So back to what I started to say and cut myself off. If your water's 86 and you're pumping that into your tank, yes, the average change of your whole tank was 1 degree, but your livestock is getting hit with a bath of 86 degree water until it can dissipate and regulate and mix, which isn't great. And yes, that could be a problem over time. I mean, when I was dosing alkalinity into my tank, I put it into a cup that trickles it in, and I noticed that the tip of 2 branches of my gorgonian got burned off, and I was thinking, did that get hit by the vortex and chip it, or did the alkalinity burn it? And odds are it was the chemical burn of it going in and then spreading into the tank. That gorgonian is just, my cup is in the wrong spot, basically, for what I'm doing. I'd have to put it in a different spot where it won't hit the gorgonian. So the same thing goes with your salt water going in at a higher temperature. You need to cool it down. Another method of cooling it down would be put in some frozen 2-liter bottles in there to give it some time to bring the temperature down of the new salt water, and that way it's closer to your tank temperature. That would be a less expensive method than buying a chiller. But no, we want the 2 bodies of water to be the same temperature if at all possible. Tim says, perhaps you should set up a nanny cam with a hidden camera next time you go somewhere. You can see if Bobby's throwing parties here. I doubt he'd throw parties, but he might start charging admission to get some extra money. Oh, the CF stands for the caffeine. Thank you. I didn't know what you were talking about. I do need to refill this because it's ice cold. But a lot of people drink cold coffee. Oh, okay. Yeah, so Wagon, if your nitrate is up, water changes will bring it down. You can dose the magnesium. You can water change down your nitrate. And if your alkalinity is high, if your new water has a lower alkalinity, that'll help bring it down too. But if the new water has high alkalinity, it'll stay high. So you're kind of having a juggling act between this will solve this, but that won't solve that. And so you're going to have to find what works best for you for the entire scenario to get everything balanced where it works out just right for your aquarium. So definitely have to dose magnesium, and you definitely have to do water changes to bring your nitrate down. Your alkalinity being high, we need to find out how high is. And you'll have to give me a real number for me to help you. But if it's under 11, it's probably okay. Richard says, do you build power brick racks to organize them? Yes, I do. I sell them. They're acrylic. They hold 4 or 5 bricks. And I include with them the Velcro strap to tie them in place so they stay. And I think I make them too big. Because I grabbed some power bricks I had, and I have these large bricks. And then I noticed that a lot of people had these smaller bricks. I'm like, the rack's kind of large. And I almost feel like I should make a smaller one for small size bricks. So I'd have to actually do a survey or something and get some information from many of you to find out what the average sizes are so we can come up with something that looks good, that works out. But the good news is even a small brick will fit on the large rack. But a large brick would be a tricky thing on the smaller one. Chris, don't feel bummed. The beauty of the live stream is it is live initially, but then after a while it just becomes a recording, and then you can watch it in its entirety on YouTube later on. And a lot of people do that. We have, like right now we have 150 people on here. And, but by next week, 4,000 people have watched and listened to this show. So it's for everyone, and we can't all schedule things at the exact same time. Digital Soundscapes, you are very welcome. Thank you for saying that. That was nice of you. Chris is binging the last season of Better Call Saul. So listen, I was trying to watch the first episode, and I was like, I don't understand what's going on. So I went to the last episode of the previous season, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I think I watched like seasons 1 and 2 on Netflix, and then the new season's like 6 or something, or 5. And I was like, oh, I'm like way behind. So I started to watch like the beginning of season 3, and I couldn't remember anything. I was like, oh, I remembered some, but really very little. I thought, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to start with episode 1, season 1, and just work my way through it all the way to the end, which I actually enjoy. And over the last month, I binged every single season of Big Bang Theory. It was so good. And I'm so sad that I finished it. I watched all 12 seasons. It was so good. And I watched it inside here only, by the Reef. I am intentionally having certain things on in the studio, and then I have something else on in here. I don't want to watch Better Call Saul in both because I'm trying to separate work from home. And so I really loved Big Bang Theory. It was so good. Another one that I love to binge from time to time is all of Friends. And last year I binged all of Supernatural, which was 15 seasons, and that was fantastic. I am big on binging massive series. I also watched all of the Harlequin cartoon series that's on HBO Max. There's 3 seasons, and that was fun because I didn't know it was on until season 3 started. So I got to start with episode 1, season 1, and work my way through all of it. I'm a huge TV nut. I love television. I love my drama on TV. Oh, good. Wagon, thank you for giving me this information. Alkaline's at 11, calcium's at 400, magnesium's at 1,000. When you do the magnesium test, do it 3 times in a row. Because magnesium, when you test it, it can be off by a huge factor. And so you might get a test that says 1,000, you might get a test that says 1,280, and another one that says 980 or something. But at least that way you can get the average of 3. But that is your low one. So that one you definitely want to bring up, according to that one test you gave me. But double check it. And it wouldn't hurt to take a water sample to your local fish store and have them double check to make sure your kit isn't faulty as well, in case the number is actually quite high and this kit is telling you it's 1,000 when it's actually not. It's just good to double check, and I've done that. When I have a test that's like, okay, this number seems abnormal to me, I'll grab a water sample, take it to the local fish store and say, can we double check this just to verify my kit is accurate? And I do the same thing with ICP. When I send it off and I'm looking at the stuff, I want to see if their numbers are close to my test kits. I want to see if the numbers are close to what the Trident tells me, and just make sure everything's on the up and up. So double check. But yeah, alkaline at 11 is okay, actually. It might be high to you, but that's the high of what's acceptable, or we can keep between 8 and 11. If you want to be less than 11, don't dose alkalinity for a little while. And but you definitely do need to add magnesium if that test is correct. Digital Soundscape says, how often should I do water changes? I'm changing salt mixes from the store salt water to Red Sea Pro. It has great parameters, and I would like to get as much new salt water in the system ASAP, safely. Well, you are limited by how much you can mix at a time to do your water changes, and of course, how much of every water change will be in relation to the size of your aquarium. But you could do a water change every single week if you wanted to. I don't know that you need to do it as, like you said, I want to replace all of it. There's got to be a reason why, but I don't know what the problem is with your tank right now. But, normally it would be 25% of the water being changed once a month would suffice. But if there's a need and you see this need is important and you want to take care of it, then go ahead and you can do a weekly water change, and you could decide how much of that water you want to change. But if you did 25% every single week for a month, you'd essentially change 100%, even though that's not completely true, because the first time you change 25%, you have 75% of the old water, and you put in new water, which then mixes together. The next time you do 25%, it wasn't 25% of only the dirty water. Some of it was still good. So you see what I'm saying? It changes a little bit. And people that are better at math than me can tell you exactly the percentages. And Randy Holmes Farley will show you that. So if you want to go find that article, type in Randy Holmes Farley water change. And you could even do reefkeeping.com. And that'll take you to his article. And he goes into all this in depth for paragraphs. And you could see his spreadsheets, and he explains it all. Paul says, this might be the right video for me. I do 5% weekly water changes even though parameters are perfect. Is that necessary, or am I overdoing it? You're not overdoing it. You're just choosing to do 5% a week or 20% a month. I was saying 25% a month, so you're kind of within reason. You're just choosing to do it, in 4 sessions versus doing 1 session. But if everything's staying perfect, like you said, and all the corals are growing and doing well, then keep doing what you're doing. Paul, thank you very much for the super chat. I appreciate it. That was so kind of you. I'm going to use that at Starbucks. Sometimes people like to know what I spend their money on. Sometimes it's food for Spock. Sometimes it's coffee for me. And you are very welcome, Paul. He said, thank you for your kindness and advice. Sometimes I have to read out the questions on purpose because people are listening to this and they're not watching it. So I like to include everyone so no one feels left out. Plaid Joker says, oh my god, I just joined Rewind and saw that you were getting an Achilles. Actually my favorite fish of all time. Total goals. I've always wanted one. And yeah. So that's going to happen. Oh! Paul said, mine just ate all my acans. That's not good. Okay, Manuel says, my phosphate is 2.5 with API, and my Hannah checker says it's 0.00. I have a lot of brown in my tank. I'm using Phosguard and Purigen. I think Purigen is for nitrate, and Phosguard is for phosphate. And if the phosphate is between 0 and, I'm not sure if that's Well, I mean, you said 2.5, but I'm not sure if it's like 0.025 or it literally is 2.5. But I would say the API test kit probably isn't accurate. But the checker being 0.00 is also suspect. What you could do is you could take some fish food and you could put it in a small bowl of water, just a little tiny dish, and let it thaw. Whether it's, okay, I'm thinking frozen. You might have pellet food or flake food or something. Just mix up some fish food in a small amount of water and take a little bit of that water after it's settled and it's just, clear liquid with the food sitting at the bottom, and do your HANA checker to verify the phosphate and see if it still measures 0.00. If it still measures 0, then the checker is not telling you the truth either. But because fish food invariably has phosphate in it. And we want to make sure that your tank doesn't have too much, but doesn't have too little. Now, you say have a lot of brown, and the brown could be a couple of things. It could be diatoms. It could be a hint of cyanobacteria. It could be dinoflagellates. And those are 3 different things with 3 different solutions. And we definitely don't want to let dinoflagellates take hold in your tank. So we want to make sure you have some nitrate and some phosphate in the tank no matter what. And maybe the products you're using to strip them out are doing too much of a good job and taking out too much. So we want to not overdo it. We want to have good filtration, but not strip it down to nothing. And then hopefully you can get rid of this brown stuff. Now, in not knowing what the brown stuff is, I can't really give you great advice in that area, but I would say siphoning out some of it would be my normal approach. But if it's dinoflagellates, if you have to siphon some out, you've got to put in new salt water, and new salt water fuels the dinos to grow even more. And usually with dinoflagellates, you don't want to do water changes at all, because every time you put in new salt water, you're causing more chaos. And we want to not do that. We want to shrink this stuff away, not let it bloom and go everywhere. Oh, yeah. Hussein, if your tank is 77 and your water is 86, you definitely want to put a chiller on there. I would totally do that. I think that would be your best bet. Also, how can I match the pH in the newly mixed salt water? Well, if you have a pH meter that you hold in your hand, it kind of looks a little bigger than this, and it has a probe. You can put the probe in your tank, and it'll say 8.2. And then you go to your barrel, and you can stick it in there, and you can say what it says. It might say 7.9. It might say 7.8. It might say 8.3. I mean, we don't know what it's going to say. But I do know this. The salinity has to match, and the temperature has to match to get an accurate pH measurement. That's why alkalinity might be an easier test to verify with. And that way you can make sure that they are the same. And if they're not the same, you have to buffer it up. It's very rare that your pH and your alkalinity is going to be higher than your tank. But some salt mixes do mix higher. And since you're only changing a portion of your water, if it's a little bit higher, it's not going to cause chaos. Now, when I did my big water change yesterday, because I turned off the circulation to make that cloudiness settle out, my alkalinity was lower in the new water going in with my 130-gallon water change. But I went ahead after 20 minutes, I verified alkalinity on the tank was a little bit lower. I buffered it right back up to where it belonged. And, then 30 minutes later, the Trident ran and it said the alkalinity was right where it belonged. So I did the right move. I would have preferred to buffer it before I pumped it in, but I buffered it within 20 minutes of the water going in. So it was kind of on the tail end. The thing is, what I didn't want to do was pump in water with lower alkalinity and just leave it and let the tank eventually find equilibrium, because then all the corals would have noticed a big deficiency of like 1 DKH. And I didn't want to have SPS corals start turning white on me, obviously. I want to keep them healthy and happy. So having it dip for a few minutes is okay, but to take a day or two to get back on track, I wasn't willing to do that. So I went in and buffered it up. But normally I would like to buffer it up in the container and then pump it over. And that's what I normally have done in the history of my hobby. Oh, we're near the end of the questions. Oh, nice. Berg says currently I was watching all the Netflix Marvel shows with my wife who hasn't seen them yet. That's awesome. I just watched the first 3 episodes of Andor yesterday. Looks really good. I'm very curious to see where this goes. Oh, yes. I saw Breaking Bad. Chris is saying, I hope you watch Breaking Bad. I watched the entire thing. It had the best finale of any finale in the history of finales. It was so well done. I really, really enjoyed that show. And one day I will binge all of Breaking Bad all over again. It's gonna happen. Richard says, how often can you use Reef Enhance in your aquarium? Twice a week. Ah, okay. Michael, you and your typos. I'm sorry, Manuel, you and your typos. He said, correction, 0.25 on the API. So your HANA's saying 0, the API is saying 0.25, so it's somewhere in there. It's pretty low, but the brown stuff concerns me. Why don't you join Club Milov's Reef, and that way, if you're a member already, you're in. Post some pictures of your tank. Let's take a look and see what's going on, and then we can help you identify the problem. There is an actual dinoflagellate support group if you have dinos, and they will help you get rid of that stuff. They'll tell you all the things you need to do. It's quite the ordeal. It's a very labor-intensive process with a lot of things to do, but dinoflagellates have chased people right out of the hobby. So we want to make sure that that stuff is not taking hold in your tank. Hussein says, is pH of 8.7 too high for fish and corals? Yes. My 120-gallon tank has been maintaining 8.6 to 8.7 throughout the day, 8.6 at night. I think you need to calibrate your pH probe again because that number doesn't seem realistic to me. That's very high, and usually when a tank gets over 8.5, if you have SPS corals, they start stressing and filaments start coming off of them because it's just too high. The goal number, the ideal high of the day should be 8.3. Keeping 8.3 around the clock like Chris Meckley does at ACI Aquaculture is the miracle boy. No one can do that but him. That would be the ideal. Most people, their tanks run 8.1 to 8.3 on a good day. Other guys out there, their tank is running 7.9 to 8.1. Some people have tanks that are really pretty, that are more softy based, that are 7.7 to 7.9. But if your tank truly is measuring those numbers and the livestock is acting completely normal, then the pH probe might be faulty. It might just need to be recalibrated. I know that my tank was measuring 8.1 to 8.3. I felt really good about myself. And then I replaced the probe with a new one, and my tank suddenly was 7.9 to 8.1. And I was like, dang it, I want my old probe back because it gave me a number I like to see. But in the meantime, I decided not to sweat it. And now my tank is, let me take a check here. My tank is averaging, it seems to, well, I just did a water change, so that threw off the scale. But it says my average is about 8.0. My minimum was 7.8. My maximum was 8.3. So my tank tends to be somewhere around 8.0 to 8.2. So 8.6 to 8.7, yeah, that's too high. And I'm just hoping that the numbers are just false. And Paul says, on the Trident, mine always reads 1 DKH lower than HANA, even after calibration. Which one would you say is more accurate? I would say the Trident is more accurate than the HANA checker. I think the HANA checker has quite a margin of error. You'd have to double check this. I've seen this posted a lot, but I don't commit it to memory. I use my ELOS test kit, and I use my Trident, and I keep track of my numbers that way. Michael says, does pulsing zinnia soak up nutrients? Can't seem to keep my nitrate up since they are covered, the back glass. Never thought I'd have to dose nitrate, LOL. Actually, zinnia is known to be a nitrate controller. And there were, you know how people have refugiums? Some people back in the early 2000s would have zinnia in there instead of macroalgae, and they used it for their nitrate control. So yeah, I believe it could be soaking up your nitrate. And congrats on having this. And I want to see a picture of your tank because I love zinnia. Is it the white pom-pom zinnia or is it the Red Sea zinnia? But either way, really pretty coral. So it's great for doing videos. And you know, you could share those reels and make everyone around the world just ooh and ah over your tank. Austin says, is there anything you would recommend to boost coloration and growth of Acropora? Trace elements. And it would be good to know what you're lacking through an ICP test. And that way, once you know what you're lacking, you can actually put in the trace elements your tank needs, whether it's potassium or it's cobalt or even trace amounts of copper, believe it or not, or manganese or molybdenum. There's a lot of different trace elements on the market, and it's nice to know which ones your tank actually needs rather than just pouring in a magic bottle of trace elements, which is mostly water with some elements. So finding out what you're lacking will help you identify, because certain ones enhance the reds, other ones enhance the blues. Most of them are pretty standard. We have a lot of green and brown in our hobby. So you just want to find the right ones. And then, of course, lighting is important. Water clarity is important. Good foods is important. All these things tie in. There's a lot. But yeah, trace elements would definitely assist in helping. Let's see. I'll make sure I didn't skip anybody here. Hussein says, high pH, how to low pH, or add fresh water to low. Oh, I think you're saying if your measure is high, if your pH is too high, how can you lower it? You can dose white vinegar to bring pH down. So like in a tank that's been overdosed with kalkwasser and the pH is crazy high, adding some white vinegar by the teaspoon can bring that pH and alkalinity back down again to something more reasonable and save the livestock. But again, we want to make sure the pH reading is accurate before we make any kind of changes, and then use the right amount. So do your homework on how much white vinegar you'd need per 50 or 100 gallons. Paul says, my tank ranges from 8.1 to 8.4, and at 8.4, my Acropora looks the happiest. Yeah, I can believe that. Hussein says the pH probe is calibrated. I still think the number's higher than, I think it's measuring higher than what it really is. I guess it's because I'm dosing Dr. Randy Holmes Farley's alkalinity recipe number 1, Arm & Hammer, baked into soda ash. I will change to basic baking soda tomorrow. You could do the basic, you're right, the regular baking soda that hasn't been turned to soda ash, and see if that makes a difference. Let's see. And then Paul said the KZ products have done wonders for Acropora. And then Ahmed says, trace elements, how can I add those into the aquarium without stressing out, causing stress, or to use too much, I think you said? You would put it in an area of high flow, and you could drip it in. And that's what I was doing. When I was doing my 2 months of trace elements, I literally stood over the tank with a syringe, and I was like, drip. I would squeeze it, so it'd go drip, 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 drip into the area of high flow. But ideally, once I knew exactly what I needed of all the different ones, I could, according to Chris, I could mix up 1 gallon of water, or take a gallon of water, add the trace elements I'm going to use for the entire week into there, and then tell a dosing pump to trickle in 1/7 of that every single day until it's used up the whole solution. And that way I wouldn't have to actually stand there and hold it in, squeeze it in a little bit at a time. But I was doing it because I was working on my Magnatalk, and I needed to be hands-on rather than automate and hope I got it right. But you definitely don't want to overdose trace elements, which is why it's so important to do the ICP testing, because we have no test kits for trace elements. So if you're low on, I almost said vibranium, too much marble on the brain. If you're low on vanadium and you need to increase it, you would want to know what the number is, get the vanadium, dose it. After a week or 10 days, measure again and see how much it went up, if at all, because you might have to double your dose or triple your dose, but you want to know how much it is. And then when you find out what it is, you stop dosing. You know, you want to get it to the right amount and not overdose it. Just like dosing iron or something else, we want to put in the right amount for what the tank needs to replace what's lacking, but we don't want to overshoot it, just like alkalinity, just like calcium, just like magnesium, just like potassium. And then Trent says, how do we buy from your shop? MelasReef.com is the website, and on the front page, it takes you there. It says Reef Shop. You can click on it, and you'll look at all the different products I sell. I sell all kinds of dry goods. I make all kinds of acrylic products, and I ship them all over the U.S. and internationally sometimes. Some of my stuff goes up to Canada, and I've sent stuff to Germany, to Brazil, to Africa. It just depends. But yeah, I appreciate your support. I would stick a thing on the screen, but I can't find the little window. It got hidden somewhere, and I don't remember what it's called. It's not scenes, I don't think. No, I don't know what it is. It's missing. I used to have a widget, and it's hiding. But anyway, it's melasreef.com. So... And I do appreciate it when you guys shop on my website. It helps me pay the bills because this is literally the only thing I do is make money through the website. And then Chris says, have you ever dosed iodine? An ICP test says I'm a little low. Actually, I dose iodine every 15 days because I use IOD Plus from Prodibio. And one time my tank was low on it. And then I did my next ICP test hours after I dosed it. And it showed the iodine had jumped up. I was like, that's so cool. I actually have visual proof of what I poured in the tank made a change in an area of something that's so minor, you know? So that was really neat. So I would say that yes, you can definitely dose iodine. One of the most common ones is Lugal's solution. It's a small bottle that has an eyedropper on there, and it's 1 drop per 50 gallons once a week as a general way of dosing. But since I use IOD Plus, I just put that in every 15 days. I put in 1 vial. And that's worked out really well for me for many years. And my iodine tends to be a really good number on all my tests. So I'm happy with that. All right, guys. We're going to wrap this up. Remind you that to do all your water tests. It's Water Test Saturday because Caitlin said water tests save lives. And they definitely do. And if you don't test and things get away from you and you come to me later and say, hey, so my tank is really doing badly and these horrible numbers happened, I will know that you weren't testing weekly because there's no way your numbers went from that great to that bad in mere days. It takes a while for things to get bad, and it's usually because we don't test. If you are water testing now and you're using checkers, or if you're water testing and you're shaking a vial in your hand, I would suggest getting the AquaStir. That thing is fantastic. I sell them on my website. They're like 30, 35 bucks, and it has a little tiny bead that just stirs, and so you just actually count the drops, and it's just mixing for you the whole time. It's so convenient. It makes water testing fun. And I've been only using magnetic stirrers now for like the last 3 or 4 years. And it's what makes doing water testing bearable for me because I've been testing water for a long time. And at one point, you just don't want to do it anymore. You want to hire someone to do it, right? But I would definitely say, please do test your water because it's really important for your livestock. And it helps your corals thrive. It helps your fish stay healthy. And it helps you make adjustments that need to be made today so that things don't get worse tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed today's live stream, and I'll see you again in a week. And then in 2 weeks, if you happen to be near Chicago, I'll be at Aquashella, and you can come and say hi and hang out and have a blast because that's a really fun show to go to. Bye, guys.